Hello. Today we will audio read the book The Little Book That Beats the Market, written by Joel Greenblatt, forwarded by Andrew Tobias, published by John Willie Sons Inclusive. This is a 179 page book. We will start from forward. The best thing about this book, from which I intend to steal liberally for the next edition of the only investment guide you will ever need, is that most people won't believe it, or believing it won't have the patience to follow its advice. That's good, because the more people people who know about a good thing, the more expensive that thing ordinarily becomes. Bye bye bargain. Yet, unlike most systems meant to exploit anomalies in the market, Joel Greenblatt's simple notion will likely retain at least a good deal of its validity even if it becomes widely followed. I don't want to spoil the surprise. The book is short enough as it is. My role here is simply to introduce you to the author so you have some sense of just how far you can trust him. I've known Joel for decades. He's really smart, really modest, really well intentioned, and here he is unusually really successful. I mean, really successful. More to the point, his success has come from the shrewd investing, not from selling books. He is also funny. I read the first couple of chapters of this book to my 11-year-old nephew Timmy, and we both enjoyed it. Timmy, with no investable funds that I know of, then fell asleep as I raced to the end, mentally rigging my retirement plan. Let me tell you this much. In the beginning, there were mutual funds, and that was good, but their sales fees and expenses were too high. Then came no load funds, which were better. They eliminated the sales fee, but were still burdened with management fees and with the tax and transactional burden that comes from active management. Then came index funds, which cut fees, taxes, and transaction costs to the bone. Very, very good. But Joel would have you consider, in fact, is an index fund plus, where the plus comes from including in your basket of stocks only good businesses selling at low valuations, and he has an easy way for you to find them. Not everyone can beat the averages, of course, by definition, but my guess is that patient people will follow Joel's advice, will beat them over time, and that if millions of people should adopt the strategy, Vanguard, please hurry up and offer a low priced fund like this. Two things will happen. First, the advantage of investing this way will diminish but not disappear. Second, stock market valuations will become ever so slightly more rational, making our capital allocation process ever so slightly more efficient. Not bad work for the skinny little book. Now gather ye what 11-year-olds ye may, you and dive in. Andrew Tobias, author of the only investment guide you will ever need. Introduction. This book was originally inspired by my desire to give each of my 5 children a gift. I figured if I could teach them how to make money for themselves, then I would be giving them a great gift, truly one that would keep giving. I also figured that if I could explain how to make money in terms that even my kids could understand, the ones already in 6th and 8th grades anyway, then I could pretty much teach anyone how to be a successful stock market investor. When the concepts covered in this book may seem simple, perhaps too simple for sophisticated investors, each step along the way is there for a reason. Stay with it, and I assure you the payoff for both beginning and experienced investors will be huge. After more than 25 years of investing professionally and after 9 years of teaching at an Ivy League business school, I'm convinced that at least two things. First, if you really want to beat the market, most professionals and the academics can't help you. And that second, that leaves only one real alternative. You must do it yourself.
Luckily, that might not be such a bad thing. As improbable as it may seem, you can learn to beat the market through a simple step by step process. This book can teach you how. To help you along, I have included a magic formula. The formula is simple. It makes perfect sense, and with it, you can beat the market, the professionals, and the academics by a far wide margin. And you can do it with low risk. The formula has worked for many years and will continue to work for even after everyone knows it. Although the formula is easy to use and will not take much of your time, it will work for you only if you make the effort to fully understand why it works. Along the way, you will learn how to view the market, why success eludes almost all individuals and professional investors, how to find good companies at bargain prices, how you can beat the market all by yourself. I have included an appendix section for those of you with a higher level of financial training, but it is not necessary for people to read or understand the appendix to be able to understand and apply the methods found in this book. The truth is that you don't need an MBA to beat the market. Knowing lots of sophisticated formulas or financial terms isn't what makes the difference. Understanding the simple concepts in this book is. So please enjoy this gift. May the small investment of time and $20 or so greatly enrich your future. Good luck. The book contains 13 chapters and step by step instructions as 14 and 15 as appendix. Now we will start with chapter 1. Jason in the 6th grade and he's making a fortune. My son and I see him almost every day on the way to school. There's Jason in the back of his chauffeur driven limousine, all decked out in the cool clothes and dark sunglasses. Ah, to be 11-year-old, rich and cool. Now that's the life. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little carried away. I mean, it's not really a limousine, it's kind of a scooter. And the cool clothes and sunglasses part, well, that's not really true either. It's more like a belly hanging over a pair of jeans, no sunglasses, and what he had for breakfast still stuck to his face. But that's not my point. Jason's in business. It's simple business, but it works. Jason buys gum, 4 or 5 packs a day. It's 25 cents for a pack and 5 stick of gum to a package. According to my son, once in school, Jason transforms himself into a superhero of sorts. Neither rain nor sleet or nor evil hall monitors can keep Jason from selling his gum. I guess his customers like buying from a superhero, or maybe they are just stuck in school. But however he does it, Jason sells each stick of gum for 25 cents. Supposedly, I never actually seen it myself. Jason's kind of shoves an open pack of gum into a potential customer's face and repeats, You want some? You know you want some. Until his fellow student either collapses or forks out a quarter. The way my son has it figured that 5 sticks at 25 cents each, so Jason rakes it in $1.25 for each pack he sells at a cost of 25 cents per pack. That means Jason is making $1 of pure profit on every pack he can shove. I mean sell. At 4 or 5 packs a day, that's a lot of money. So after one of our daily Jason's sittings, I asked my 6th grader, Gee, how much do you think this guy Jason can make by the end of high school? My son, we will call him Ben, even though his real name is Matt, started whizzing through the calculations. using all his brain power and few fingers. Let's see, he replied. That's say $4 a day, even 5 days a week, so $20 a week, 36 weeks of school, that's $720 a year. If he has 6 years left until he graduates, that's somewhere around $4,000 more he'll make by the end of high school. Not wanting to miss an opportunity to teach, I asked Ben, if Jason offered to sell you half of his business, how much would you pay? In other words, he will share half of his profits from the gum business with you over 6 years until he graduates, but he wants you to give him money now. How much would you give him? Well, I could see Ben wheels start to turn. Now that there might be some real money on the line, maybe Jason doesn't sell 4 or 5 packs a day, but 3 packs. That's pretty safe bet. So maybe he makes $3 a day. That's still $15 in a 5-day school. So 36 weeks in school year. That's 36 times 15. I might have helped a little in here. That's over $500 a year. Jason has 6 more years, so 6 times 500 is around $3,000 by the time he graduates. So I said, so I guess you would pay Jason 1,500 for half of those profits, right? No way, Ben answered quickly. Why should I pay 1,500 to get back 1,500? That doesn't make sense. Besides, the $1,500 I get from Jason will take 6 years to collect. Why should I give $1,500 now to get back 1,500 over 6 years? Also, maybe Jason does a little better than I figured and I get more than $1,500, but he could do worse too. Yeah, I chinned in. Maybe other kids starts to sell gum in school and Jason has so much competition he can't sell as much. Nah, Jason's practically a superhero, Ben says. I don't think anyone can sell as well as Jason. So I'm not too worried about that. So I see your point, I responded. Jason's got a good business, but $1,500 is too much to pay for half. What if Jason offered you half his business for $1? Would you buy then? Of course. Ben shot back with a Dad, you are being an idiot kind of tone. So fine, I said, ignoring the tone for a moment. The right price is somewhere between $1 and $1,500. Now we are getting closer. By how much would you pay? $450. That's how much I would pay today. If I collected $1,500 over the next 6 years, I think that would be a good deal. Ben said, evidently pleased with his decision. Great, I responded. Now you finally understand what I do for a living. Dad, what the heck are you talking about? Now I am totally lost. I have never seen any gum. No, Ben, I don't sell gum. I spend my time figuring out what businesses are worth, just like you did with Jason's business. If I can buy a business for a lot less, I think it's worth I buy it. Wait a second, blurred out Ben. That sounds too easy. If a business is worth $1,000, why would anyone sell it to you for $500? Well, it turned out Ben's seemingly reasonable and obvious question was actually the magic question that got the whole project started. I told Ben that he had just asked a great question. That, believe it or not, there is place where they sell businesses at half the price all the time. I told him that I could teach him where to look and how to buy those bargains for himself. But of course, I told him there was a catch. That catch isn't the answer is incredibly complicated. It's not. The catch isn't that you have to be some kind of genius or super spy to find out $1,000 bills selling for $500. You don't. In fact, I decided to write this book so that Ben and his siblings could not only understand what I do for a living, but also that they could learn how to start finding these bargains in investments for themselves. I figured whatever career they choose in the future, even if it's not money management, a career I'm not necessarily encouraging, they will definitely need to learn how to invest some of their earnings. But like I told Ben, there is a catch. The catch is that you have to listen a long story. You have to take the time to understand the story. And most importantly, you have to actually believe that the story is true. In fact, story even concludes with a magic formula that can make you rich over time. I kid you not. Unfortunately, if you don't believe the magic you will formula will make you rich, it won't. On Unfortunately, if you don't believe the magic formula will make you rich, it won't. On the other hand, if you believe the story I am going to tell you, I mean really truly believe, then you can choose to make money with or without the formula. The formula will take significantly less time and effort than doing the work yourself, and will provide better results for more people. But you can decide which way to go when you are done reading. Okay, I know what you are thinking. What is this belief stuff about? Are we talking about a new religion? Maybe something to do with Peter Pan or the Wizard of Oz? I won't even bring up the witch side, the crystal ball thing that still scares the heck out of me, or the flying monkeys, mainly because neither has anything to do with my story. And what about the getting rich part? What's that? Can a book really teach you how to get rich? That doesn't make sense. If it could, everyone would be rich. That's especially true for a book that claims to have a magic formula. If everyone knows the magic formula and everyone can't be rich, pretty soon the formula will have to stop working. But I told you, this was a long story. I'm going to start from the very beginning. For my kids and most others, almost all this stuff will be new. For adults, even if they think they know a lot about investing already, even if they have been to graduate business school, and even if they manage other people's money professionally, most people learned wrong. And they have learned wrong from the beginning. Very few people really believe the story I am going to tell. I believe this because if they really truly did, there would be a lot more successful investors out there. There aren't. I believe I can teach you and each of you, my children, to be one of them. So let's get started. Chapter 2. Actually, just getting started is a big deal. It takes great amount of discipline to save any money. After all, no matter how much money you earn or receive from others, it's simply much easier and more immediately rewarding to find someone to spend it on. When I was young, I decided that all my money should go to Johnson Smith. Of course, I would love to tell you that Johnson Smith was an orphan who just needed little help. I would love to tell you that the money given to Johnson Smith helped change his life. I would love to tell you but it wouldn't be completely accurate. You see, Johnson Smith was a company, not just a company either. It was a company that sold whoopee cushions, itching powder, and imitation dog vomit through the mail. I mean, I didn't completely throw away all my money. I did buy some educational stuff too. Once the guys at Johnson Smith were able to sell me a weather balloon that was 10 feet tall and 30 feet round. I am not sure what a giant balloon had to do with weather, but it sounded educational sort of. Anyway, after my brother and I finally figured out how to blow it up for somehow reversing the airflow of vacuum cleanser, we ran into a big problem. The 10-foot balloon was quite a bit large than our front door. Using a complicated formula that was not even Einstein could fully comprehend, we decided that if we turned our backs and pushed really hard, the giant balloon could be squeezed out without bursting the balloon or damaging the door. And besides, our mother wasn't home yet, and it worked, except we forgot one thing. It seemed that the air outside was colder than the air inside our house. That means when we had filled our balloon with warm air, and since as everyone apparently me and my brother knew air rises, the balloon started to float away. The two of us were left chasing the giant balloon down the street for about half a mile before it finally popped on a tree. Luckily, I learned the valuable lesson from the whole experience. Although I don't exactly remember what that was, I am pretty sure it had something to do with importance of saving money for things that you might want or need in the future, rather than wasting buying giant weather balloons that you get to chase down the block or for all of 3 or 4 minutes. But for our purposes, let's assume that we can all agree that it is important to save money for the future. Let's also assume that you have been able to resist most temptations of Johnson Smith's people and thousands of other places calling you out for money. That's you or your parents have been able to provide for all of the necessities of life, including food, clothing, shelter, and that by being careful about how much you spend and have something been able to put aside at least a small amount of money. Your sale is to put that money, let's say $1,000. Your challenge is to put that money, let's say $1,000, some place where it can grow to be even more money. Sounds simple, right? Sounds simple enough. Sure, you can just put it under your mattress or in your piggy bank, but when you come to get it, even year later, you will still be left with the same $1,000 you put there in the safe first place. It won't grow at all. In fact, the prices of the things you are going to buy, the money goes up during the time your money was just sitting there. Therefore, $1,000 will buy less stuff than it used to. Your money will actually be worth less than it was worth the day you put it away. In short, the mattress plan kind of stinks. Plan B has to be better, and it is just that the $1,000 over to the bank. Not only the bank agree to hold your money, they'll pay you privilege. Even each year you can collect interest from bank, and in most cases the longer you agree to let them hold your money, the higher the interest rates you will get. If you agree to keep your $1,000 with the bank for 5 years, you might collect something like 5% in interest payments per year. So the first year you collect $50 in interest on your $1,000 original deposit, and now you will have $1,050 in the bank at the beginning of the year 2. In the year 2, you collect another 5%, a new higher total of 1050 or 52.50 in interest, and so on. Year 5, after 5 years, your $1,000 will grow into 1276. Not bad, and certainly lot better than mattress plan. Which brings us to the plan C. This plan is known as who needs the bank. There is an easy way to just skip the bank altogether and lend to businesses or to the group of individuals yourself. Often businesses borrow money directly by selling bonds. The corner bakery won't usually sell these, but large multi-million-dollar companies such as McDonald's do it all the time. If you purchase a $1,000 bond from a large company, for example, that company might agree to pay you 8% each year and pay back your original $1,000 after 10 years. That clearly beats the crummy 5% bank was willing to pay you. There's one little problem though. If you buy a bond from one of these companies and something goes wrong with its business, you will never get your interest or your money back. That's why riskier companies, say Bob House of flapjacks and pickles, usually have to pay a higher interest rate than more solid established ones. That's why companies' bonds have to pay more than the bank. People need to make more money on their bond to make up for the risk that they may not receive the promised interest rate or the original money back. Of course, if you are not comfortable taking any risk or losing your $1,000, the US government sells bonds too. While there is thing completely riskless in this world. Lending money to US government is the closest any of us will ever get. If you are willing to lend US government with money for 10 years, the government might, for example, agree to pay you something like 6% a year. If you lend shorter period of say 5 years, the rate will be much low, 4 or 5%. For purposes, the bond we will be looking at most is the US government bond that matures, pays off the original loan about after 10 years. We'll be looking at that one because 10 years is a long time. We will want to compare how much we can earn from a safe bet like a US government bond and our other long term investment choices. So, if the annual interest rate on the 10-year government is 6%, that essentially means that people who are willing to lend their money out for 10 years but are unwilling to take any risks losing their original investment or of not receiving the promised interest rate can still expect to receive 6% each year on their money. In other words, for people willing to lock their money up for 10 years, the no risk rate of return is 10% per year. It's important to understand what that means. It means if anyone asks you to loan them money or to invest them over long term, they better expect pay you more than 6% a year. Why? Because you can get 6% a year without taking any risk. All you have to do is lend money to US government and they will guarantee that you receive your 6% each year and every year along with all the money back after 10 years. If Jason wants money for a share of his gum business, that investment better earn you more than 6% per year, or no way should you do it. If Jason wants to borrow money over long term, same deal. He better expect to pay you lot more than 6%. After all, you get 6% risk free by lending to US government. Quick summary. You can stick your money under the mattress, but plan kind of stinks. You can put your money in the banks or buy bonds for US government. You will receive guaranteed an interest rate and your money back with no risk. You can buy bonds sold by companies or other groups. You will promise higher interest rates that you will get by putting your money in the bank or by buying government bonds. But you could lose some of all your money. So you better get paid enough for taking the risks. You can do something else with your money. We will talk about what in the next chapter. And I almost forgot. Hot air rises. Hey, I did learn something from the balloon after all. Thanks, Johnson Smith. Bank deposits up to $1 lakh or $100,000 are guaranteed by an agency of US government. You might hold your bank deposit or bond until it matures, possibly 5 or 10 years, depending upon what you buy, to guarantee no loss of your original investment. I am going to make your life even simpler. As I write this, the 10-year US government bond rate is substantially lower than 6%. However, whenever the long-term government bond is paying less than 6%, we will still assume rate is 6%. In other words, our other investment alternatives will at a minimum still have to beat 6% no matter how low long-term investment US government bond interest rates go. The big picture is that we want to make sure we earn a lot more from our other investments than we could earn without taking any risks. Obviously, if long-term US government bond rates rose to 7% or higher, we would use 7% or higher number. Now that's really it. Chapter 3. Okay, what else can you do with your money? Let's face it, putting money in a bank or lending it to the government is really boring. Hey, I know. Why don't we just go to the track and bet it all on the horse? Nah, I actually tried that, where a bunch of greyhound dogs run around in the circle chasing little mechanical rabbit. It's fun to watch and you get to hang with some really great people. Some of them even have teeth. You know what? though on second thought, maybe that's not such a good idea either. I kind of figured it wasn't for me after my dog actually caught the rabbit. My little guy got trampled by the other dogs on the first turn, got up and started running the wrong way. Unfortunately, while the mechanical rabbit zips around the track at about 60 miles an hour, and when my dog, the one I had placed my faith in and my money on, took a flying leap at the rabbit speeding towards him, they just say it wasn't pretty. All right, since you are probably concerned, the dog slammed into 60 miles per hour rabbit at full speed, flew 30 feet in air, and tragically disqualified, which means, alas, lost all my money. In any case, now what we explored most of the logical alternatives for money, though I am pretty sure they race forms and various crustensis someplace I haven't found yet. Let's look at one more. How about investing in a business? Maybe after all, Jason's going to grow up someday. Maybe he will open up his own gum store. Better yet, maybe he'll open up a whole bunch of gum stores, usually referred to as a chain of stores, under some catchy name like Jason's Gum Shops. Let's assume that Jason's personally trains all the sales in his unique brand of gum selling, and that the chain is wildly successful. It could happen. Now Jason comes to you willing to sell half his business. He wants to buy a new pair of sunglasses, a real limousine, and maybe a house for himself and the lucky Mrs. Jason. Only now he's asking for big bucks, and he will have to do some serious figuring where we can decide whether to take Jason's up on his offer. It turns out that Jason growing up quite a bit since the days when he scootered himself around town, and he now wants to hefty $6 million for half ownership of the business. Of course, $6 million is more than most of us can afford, but luckily Jason isn't looking for half ownership of the business. Of course, $6 million bucks is more than any of us can afford. Luckily, Jason isn't looking to sell half ownership of his business all to one person. In fact, Jason has decided to divide ownership of the business into million equal pieces or shares, as they referred on the Wall Street. Jason's plan is to keep 5 lakh shares for himself and sell his other 5 lakh shares for $12 a piece, or $6 in total. Anyone interested in buying part of Jason's business at that price can buy one share for $12, 100 shares for $1,200, 1,000 shares for $12,000, or pretty much any number shares they want. If you were to buy, for example, 10,000 shares costing 120,000, you may now own 1% of Jason's Gum Shops. 10,000 shares divided by 1 million shareholders today total. That 1% doesn't mean that you would own the spearmint gum department or a small piece of one of the Jason stores. Your 10,000 shares or 1% ownership of Jason's Gum Shop means that you would be entitled to 1% of the future earnings of the entire Jason's Gum Shop business. Now, of course, all you would have to do is figure out whether paying $120,000 for 1% of Jason's future gum profit is a good deal. This is where our analysis gets a little sticky. We have to be good gumshoes so we don't blow it and have our money chewed up and spit out. Anyways, you get the idea. Luckily, Jason has provided us with lot of information. Since we already know that Jason wants $12 for each share in Jason's Gum Shop, and there are 1 million shares in total, this is referred to as 1 million shares outstanding. This means that Jason This means that Jason thinks his business is worth $12 million, and therefore he thinks that 1% of which is $120,000 we just talked about. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but what matters here is what we think it's worth. So let's take a look at some of the information Jason has given us. It seems that last year Jason sold off a total of $10 million worth of gum from the stores in the highly successful Jason Gum's shop chain. Of course, $10 million is how much gum Jason stores sold, but unfortunately $10 million isn't how much profit Jason made. Obviously, Jason's store ran up a few expenses along the way. Naturally, there was the most of the gum that Jason sold that totaled $6 million. That left him with $4 million in profit. But wait, we are far from finished. There was the rent Jason had to pay for the use of his There was a rent Jason had to pay for the use of his 10 store locations. Then there were those pesky employees who for some reason expected to get paid for selling gum and keeping the stores clean and running smoothly. There was electricity and heating cost, travel, trash removal and accounting of all kinds of administrative costs. So Jason could track of all the money gum flying all over the place, and the stuff adds up. In this case, another $2 million in expense to be exact. Thus got Jason's business down to $2 million in profit. But as we suspected, we are not done yet. Jason's business had to pay taxes. The government needs money to provide services to its citizens, and profitable business must pay their share of taxes to keep it going. In the case of Jason's gum shop, the tax is equal to 40% of income, a fairly standard rate for many businesses. So 40% of the $2 million profit Jason's gum earned last year had to go to government in form of taxes. Since 40% of $2 million is $800,000, then that left Jason's gum shop with a net profit of $1.2 million. Actually, Jason provided us with all the information about last year's income in a very neat table known as the income statement. So there you have it. Jason's gum shop earned $1.2 million last year. Jason thinks that makes the business worth a total of $12 million. He is willing to sell us a piece of that business in any size up to the half the entire business. At that $12 million valuation, $6 million for half, $1.2 million for 10%, 100 for 1% ownership, and one share equaling 1/1,000,000th of business for merely $12. Should we do it? To keep it simple, let's take a look at what we will be getting for each $12 share. Well, Jason has divided business into $1 million equal shares. That means if the whole business earned $1,200,000, each share earned 1/1,000,000th of that amount. Since $1,200,000 divided by 100,000 is $1.2, each $12 share was entitled to get $1.2 in earnings. Is that a good deal? Let's look at it this way. If we invest $12 for a piece of Jason's business and earn $1.2 in business year, our first year investment would be 10%. A 10% return is our first year. Pretty damn good, right? In chapter 2 we discussed that at the very least we had to beat the 6% annual rate for 10 years US government bond. That's because buying these bonds would earn 6% without having to take any risk. A 10% return on the first year. Since earning 10% is clearly more than earning 6% in peso fatso, it is then true that paying $12 share that earns $1.2 is a good deal. Well, life isn't that simple. But as we'll see in the later chapter, almost the bottom line is we are there off to a good start, but we have to consider few more things before we make up our mind. First, $1.2 per share is what Jason Gum Shops earned last year. We have to determine whether we think the business will earn that $1.2 in the coming year, or more than that, or maybe less. Last year earnings may be a good starting point for estimating next year's earnings, but it may not. If Jason's Gum Shop doesn't earn $1.2 next year, business won't be earning 10% as expected on the uh, $12 share we just paid. It could be higher, but it could be lower. Second, once we come up with estimate for how much Jason's business will earn next year, we have to determine how confident we are in our prediction. If we are taking a wild guess because we have no idea whether gum sales are steady from year to year, whether Jason's gum store are just a fad, or whether new competition from other candy stores will affect Jason's profits, then our estimate may be suspect. But we have to be reasonable. If we are not sure whether earnings will be 150 or $2 per share, that kind of uncertainty is fine. Both of those numbers will represent that Jason's business is earning more than 10% in our initial $12 per share cost. On the other hand, if we are uncertain whether earnings will be 20% share or $1.2, then our guaranteed 6% from the government bond may start to look a whole lot better. The third little detail we haven't yet considered is the next year is only 1 year. Even if Jason's Gum Shop earns $1.2 next year, or lot more or lot less, what about all years after that? Will earnings keep growing every year? Maybe each store will keep selling more gum each year and earnings will increase that way. Or maybe if 10 years can make $1.2 per share, getting to 20 stores in a few years will cause earnings to grow by $2.4 per share or even higher. Of course, the gum business could always turn sorry in the first few years, causing gum earnings to remain stuck at levels well below $1.2 for a long time. And there's more. Okay, you are beginning to panic. I can feel it. This stuff is too hard. How are you going to figure it all out? How come anyone? And if you take your best shots, am I expecting you and my kids for that matter to gamble real money on pile of guesses and estimates? Oh, yeah, aren't there tons of MBAs and PhDs, smart financial types and professional investment analysts, not to mention full-time money managers trying to figure out pretty much same things? How can little old you compete with all those handwriting smart, hardworking, smart, sophisticated guys? All right, already enough. Calm down, Shesha. Can't I take you somewhere? I take you somewhere. Can't I take you somewhere? Have a little faith. Hang in there. I will do the summary thing. Tell you what's important to remember, and we'll move on. Man, if I have to hold your hand for every little thing, so here's what you need to know. Buying a share in business means you are purchasing percent interest of that business. You are entitled to a portion of that business fortune future earnings. Figuring out what a business is worth involves estimating, okay, guessing how much the business will earn in future. Second. Third, the earnings from your share of the profits must give you more money than you would receive by placing same amount of money in a risk-free 10-year US government bond. Remember, last chapter we set 6% as an absolute minimum annual return when government bond rates fall below 6%, and no. And fourth, no, I haven't forgotten about the magic formula, but you are going to have to stop bugging me about it, okay, Shisha? Chapter 4. Figuring out what a business is worth isn't easy. After lots of guessing and estimating, maybe you get it right and maybe you get it wrong. But what if you could figure out what a business was really worth? Is there something you could do with the information? Is there really a place, like I promised in the first chapter, a place where you can buy a business for half its true value? A place where you can get $1,000 of value for only $500? You bet there is. But first, let's spend a few minutes in business school. For the past 9 years, I have taught an investing course to a group of graduate business students at an Ivy League university. Needless to say, this is pretty smart group of students. Each year on the first day of class, I walk in and open the newspaper to the financial section. Found there are pages and pages tables of lots of numbers in tiny print. Sounds great so far, right? Anyway, posted in this table is a list of company names, and next to each name is a bunch of prices. Call out the name of a big well-known company. I say the students come up with companies like General Electric, IBM, General Motors, and Abercrombie and Fitch. Actually, it doesn't really matter what company the students shout out. My main point is easy to make. Any company name is almost any industry, large or small, well known or not, will do. The result is always the same. I look in the paper next to General Electric and read off the numbers. It says here that the price for one share of General Electric was $35 yesterday. It also says here that the highest price the General Electric share has sold for over last year was $53 per share. The lowest for the share over the last year was $29. For IBM, it is the same thing. You could have purchased one share of IBM yesterday for $85. Over the past year, shares of IBM have sold as much as $93 and for as little as $55. General Motors sold for $37 per share yesterday, but over the last year, shares have sold for between $30 and $68. For Abercrombie and Fitch, which was selling for $27 per share yesterday, the range of prices per share over the last year have been between $15 share at lowest and just over $33 per share at high price. I then point out that that's a pretty wide range of prices for shares and a pretty short period of time for them to change so much. Looking at the price for shares over 2 to 3 years period and would give us a even wider range. So here's the question I always ask: how can this be? These are big well-known companies. Each of these companies are divided its ownership into millions and sometimes billions of equal shares, just like Jason did with the gum shop. Initially, companies sell their shares to a public, to both individuals and big institutional investors. After that, though, the people who buy these shares are free to sell them to anyone they want. Each day, newspaper lists the name of thousands of companies and the price of which people have been buying and selling an ownership share in each. The tradition back and forth of these ownership shares takes place in a number of locations and over computer networks. These ownership shares are referred to as shares of stock, and collectively the buying and selling activity is referred to as stock market. A company as large as IBM or General Motors might have divided its ownership stake into something like a billion equal shares. That means that if at one point during the year you can purchase one share of General Motors for $30, and for one example we assume the ownership of General Motors has been divided in $1 billion equal pieces or shares, then the impiled price to purchase the entire company, all $1 billion shares, would be $30 billion. However, if at some point during the same year General Motors shares could have been purchased for $60 each, that would indicate that the cost to purchase all the General Motors would be $60 billion. So I ask the question again, how can this be? Can a value of General Motors, the largest car manufacturer in North America, change that with much within the same year? Can a company that large be worth $30 billion one day and then few months later be worth $60 billion?
So I ask the question again, how can this be? Can the general value of General Motors, the largest car manufacturer in North America, change that much within the same year? Can a company that large be worth $30 billion a day and then a few months later be worth $60 billion? Are they selling twice as many cars, making twice as many money, or doing something drastically different in their business to justify such a large change in value? Of course, it's possible. But what about the big price changes in IBM, Abercrombie and Fitch, and General Electric? Does something happen each and every year to account for large changes in value of most companies? Remember, every year the results are the same for pretty much any company for that much name. The range of high and low prices over the course of only 1 year is huge. Does this make sense? Well, to save class time, and since my attention span is usually a matter of seconds, I usually blurt out the answer. No, it takes nonsense. It makes no sense that the values of most companies swing widely from high to low or low to high during the course of each and every year. On the other hand, it seems pretty clear that the price of the share in most companies swing widely each and every year. All you have to do is look in newspaper to see that's true. So I asked my room full of smart, sophisticated students to try to explain why. Why do the prices of all these businesses move around so much each year if the value of their businesses can't possibly change that much? Well, it's a good question. So I generally let my students spend some time offering complicated explanations and theories. In fact, it's such a good question that professors have developed a whole field of economic mathematical and social study to try to explain it. Even more credible, most of the academic work has involved coming up with theories as to why something that clearly makes no sense actually makes sense. You have to be really smart to do that. So why do share prices move around so much year every year when it seems clear that the value of the underlying businesses do not? Well, here's how I explain it to my students. Who knows and who cares?
Maybe people go nuts a lot. Maybe it's hard to predict future earnings. Maybe it's hard to decide what a fair rate of return on your purchase price is. Maybe people get a little depressed sometimes and don't want to pay a lot for stuff. Maybe people get excited sometimes and are willing to pay a lot. So, maybe people simply justify high prices by making high estimates for future earnings when they are happy and justifying low prices by making low estimates when they are sad. But like I said, maybe people just go nuts a lot, still my favorite. The future is that the truth is that I don't really have to know why people are willing to buy and sell shares of the most companies at wildly different prices over a very short period of time. I just have to know that they do. Why is this helpful? Let's think about that. Suppose you figure if you suppose you figured that a business, perhaps one like Jason's gum shop, was worth between $10 and $12 per share, and at varying times during the year its shares could have purchased between $6 and $11. Suppose you figured that a business, perhaps one like Jason's gum shops, are worth between $10 and $12 per share, and at varying times during the year its shares could be purchased for between $6 and $11. Well, if you were confident about your estimate of what the business is worth, then deciding whether to buy shares when they were trading near $11 might be a difficult decision. But when shares in the same company during the same year were available at close to $6, your decision might well be much easier. At $6 per share, if your estimates of value were close to correct, then you would be buying shares in Johnson's Gum Shops for only 50 or 60 cents on a dollar, for 50 or 60% of what they were actually worth. One of the greatest stock market thinkers, Benjamin Graham, put it in this way: imagine that you and your partners in the ownership of a business crazy guy named Mr. Market. Mr. Market is subject to wild mood swings. Each day he offers to buy you share of business or sell you his share of the business at this particular price. Mr. Market always leaves the decision completely to you, and every day you have three choices. You can sell your shares to Mr. Market at his stated price. You can buy Mr. Market shares at the same price that you can, at the same price, or you can do nothing. Sometimes Mr. Market is in good mood that he names a price that is much higher than the true worth of the business. On those days, it would probably make sense for you to sell Mr. Market a share of business. On the other days, he is in such a poor mood that he names a very low price for the business. On those days, you might want to take advantage. Mr. Market's crazy offer to sell you shares at such a low price and to buy Mr. Market's shares of the business. If the price named by Mr. Market is neither high nor extraordinarily low relative to the value of the business, you might logically choose to do nothing. In the world of stock market, that's exactly how it works. The stock market is Mr. Market. If, according to the daily newspaper, General Motors is selling for $37 per share, you have three choices. You can buy shares in General Motors for $37 each. You can sell your shares in General Motors and receive $37 each, or you can do nothing. If you think GM is worth $70 per share, then you might consider $37 a ridiculously low price and decide to buy some shares. If you think GM is really worth only $30 or $35 per share and you happen to own some shares, you might decide to sell Mr. Market at $37. If you think each share of General Motors is worth between $40 and $45 per share, you may decide to do nothing. At $37 per share, the price is not a very big enough discount for you to buy, nor is it $37 generous enough to make you want to sell. In short, you are never required to act. You alone can choose to act only when the price offered by Mr. Market appears very low. When you might decide to buy some shares or extremely high, when you might consider selling any shares your own to Mr. Market. Graham referred to this practice of buying shares of a company only when the trades are at a large discount to true value of investing with a margin of safety. The difference between your estimate value per share of say $70 and the purchase price of the share, perhaps $37, represents a margin of safety for your investment. If your original calculation of the value of share in a company like General Motors were too high, or the car business unexpectedly took a turn for the worse after your purchase, the margin of safety in your original purchase price could still protect you from losing money. Even if you originally estimated fair value to be $70 and it turned out that $60 or even $50 was close to the true value of each share, a purchase price of $37 would leave enough margin for you to still make money on your original investment. Graham figured that always using the margin of safety principle when deciding whether to purchase shares of a business from a crazy partner like Mr. Market was the secret of making safe, and reliable investment profits. In fact, these two concepts requiring a margin of safety for your investment purposes and viewing the stock market as if it were a partner like Mr. Market have been used much less by some of the greatest investors of all time. But wait, there's still a problem here. Okay, maybe a few. First, as we discussed, how are you supposed to know what the business is worth? If you can't place a fair value in the company, then you can't divide the number of shares that exist, and you can't figure out what the fair value of a share stock is. So even if a share of General Motors sells for $30 on one day and $60 on a share on a few months later, you have no idea whether one of the price is cheap and one is expensive, or both are cheap or both are expensive, or whatever. In short, from what we have learned so far, you wouldn't know a bargain price if it hit you in the head. Second, if you could figure out a fair price or price range for the business, how would you know whether you were right or even close to right? Remember, in the process of figuring out the value of a business, all you have to do is make a bunch of guesses and estimates. Those estimates involve predicting earnings for a business for many years in the future. Even experts, whatever that means, have a tough time doing that. Third, as we already covered, aren't there tons of smart, hardworking people trying to figure out all this stuff too? Aren't there lots of stock market analysts, professional investors who spend their time trying to figure out what companies are really worth? Even if I could really teach you how to invest, wouldn't these smart, knowledgeable and experienced people be better at it than you? Wouldn't these people scoop out all the obvious bargains before you got there? How can you compete with those guys? All you did was buy a book that says even kids or teenagers can learn how to make big money in stock market. Does that make sense? What chance do you really have? Well, a sane person might start to feel a little foolish about now. But you paid good money for this book. You could already be a few cards short of a full deck. So at least we have got that going for us. In any case, ready or not, here comes a summary. Stock prices move around widely over very short periods of time. This does not mean that the values of the underlying companies have changed very much during the same period. In fact, the stock market acts very much like a crazy guy named Mr. Market. It is a good idea to buy shares of a company at a big discount to your estimated value of those shares. Buying shares at a large discount to value will provide you with a large margin of safety and lead to safe and consistent profitable investments. From what we have learned so far, you would know a bargain price stock if it hit you in the head. Being a few cards short of a full deck, you might as well keep reading. Chapter 5. I love movies, and The Karate Kid is one of my favorite. Of course, I would like any art form where eating popcorn and candy are part of the deal. But there is one scene in this particular movie that holds special meaning for me. In it, the old karate master, Mr. Miyagi, is supposed to be teaching his teenage apprentice Daniel how to fight. The boy is new at school and being bullied by a group of karate trained toughs. Daniel hopes learning karate will help him stand up to his tormentors and win the girl of his dreams. But instead of teaching him karate, Mr. Miyagi puts Daniel to work, waxing cars, painting fences, and sanding floors. So after a whirlwind of scenes showing poor Daniel working his fingers to the bone, waxing, painting, and sanding, The youth has finally had enough. He confronts Mr. Miyagi and essentially says, "What am I wasting my time doing this simple and menial task which I should be learning karate?" Mr. Miyagi has Daniel stand up from his standing duties and starts throwing jabs at the young boy while yelling, "Wax on, wax off." Daniel deflects each jab with the swirling motions he learned for so many hours of waxing car. Next, Mr. Miyagi throws a punch while yelling, "Paint the fence." Once again, Daniel deflects the punch, this time using the up and down action of painting a fence. Similarly, Mr. Miyagi karate kicks is then stopped by Daniel's expert floor standing ability. In fact, by learning these few simple techniques, Daniel has unwittingly become a karate master. Now, in good movies, the viewer participates in something called as willing suspension of disbelief. In other words, we kind of know that Ralph Macchio, the actor who played Daniel in the movie, wouldn't really use the waxing thing to defend himself in the dark alley. In the real world, before he could finish his first coat, Mr. Machiko would probably get smacked in the head and drop like a smack of potatoes. But while caught up in the movie, we are ready and more than willing to believe that Mr. Miyagi's simple methods can truly work wonders. Well, I'm going to have to ask you to do a little suspending of disbelief too. Not because what you are going to learn doesn't make sense. On the contrary, the two concepts in this chapter are simple and obvious. It's just that these two concepts are so very basic. You will have a hard time believing that such simple tools can turn you into stock market master. But pay close attention now, and I promise you won't get a smack in the head later. When we last left Jason, the hero of our story, he had just asked us to chew over an exciting proposal. His proposal was simple. Would we want to buy a piece of wildly successful chain of gum stores, Jason's Gum Shops? You want some, you know you want some. But as much as Jason wanted to sell us a piece of his business, giving him an answer wasn't turning out to be so simple. By looking at the income statement that Jason had provided us, it turned out that Jason's chain of 10 gum shops had earned a total of $1.2 million last year. $1.2 million divided by 1 million shares at Jason's asking price of $12 for each share. That meant that based on last year's earnings, Jason's gum shops would have given us a 10% return for each $12 share purchased. The 10% return calculated by dividing the earnings per share for the year by the share price is known as earnings yield. A 10% return calculated by dividing the earnings per share for the year by the same share price is known as earnings yield. We then compared the earnings yield of 10% we could receive from an investment in Jason's business with a 6% return we could risk-free from investing in 10-year US government bond. We concluded without too much trouble that earning 10% every year on our investment was better than earning 6%. Of course, although that analysis was simple, we identified a bunch of problems. First, Jason's gum shop earned $1.2 per share last year. Next year's earning might turn out to be a completely different story. If Jason's business earned less than $1.2 next year, it wouldn't earn a 10% return on our investment, and maybe we would be better off with a sure 6% from the government bond. Second, even if Jason's business did earn $1.2 per share next year or even more, that's only 1 year. How would we ever know how much Jason's gum shops would earn in future years? It could be a lot more than $1.2 per share, but it could be a lot less, and our earnings yield could drop significantly below the 6% we could have earned risk-free in US government. Lastly, even if we have had an opinion about future earnings, how could we ever have any confidence that our predictions would turn out to be right? In short, all of our problems seem to boil down to this: it's hard to predict the future. If we can't predict the future earnings of a business, then it's hard to place a value on that business. As we discussed, Jason's Gum Shop earned $1.2 per share last year. As at a price of $12 per share, our earnings yield was therefore $1.2 dividend by $12, or a 10% is enough. But what if Jason's Gum Shop earned $2.4 per share? What if we could still buy a share for $12? What would the earnings yield be then? Well, $2.4 divided by 12 equals 20%. Therefore, if Jason's Gum Shops have earned $2.4 per share last year, a price of $12 per share, the earnings yield would be 20%. If Jason's Gum Shop had earned $3.6 per share last year at a price of $12 per share, the earnings would be 30%. But it gets easier. Now, follow closely, because these are the two main points at this cheaper chapter. After here comes the question that will determine whether you understand the first. All things being equal, if you could buy a share of Jason's Gum Shop at $12, which of those earnings results would be preferred? Would you prefer the Jason's Gum Shop had earned $1.2 per share last year, $2.4 per share last year, or $3.6 per share last year? In other words, would you prefer that the earnings yield calculated using last year's earnings was 10%, 20%, or 30%? Drum roll, please. If you answered that 30% is obviously better than 20% and 10%, you would be correct. And that's the point. You would rather have higher earnings yield than a lower one. You would rather the business earn more relatively the price you are paying than less. Now, that wasn't so hard, but here comes the second point of the chapter, which focuses on something a bit different from the first. Now, that wasn't so hard, but here comes the second point of the chapter, which focuses on something a bit different from the first. Otherwise, I would be saying the same thing twice, which would be wasting a time, which is something I would never do unless I put it in parentheses. The first point related to price, how much we receive in earning relatively to our purchase price. In other words, is the purchase price a bargain or not? But beyond price, we might also want to know something about the nature of the business itself. In short, we are buying a good business or a bad business. Of course, there are plenty of ways we could define what makes a business either good or bad. Among other things, we could look at the quality of its products or services, the loyalty of its customers, the value of its brand, the efficiency of its operation, the talent of its management, the strength of its competitors, or the long-term prospects of its business. Obviously, any of these criteria, either alone or in combination, would be helpful in evaluating whether we were purchasing a good or a bad business. All of these assessments would also involve making guesses, estimates, and/or predictions. And we already agreed that it's a pretty hard thing to do. So once again, it might make sense to first examine some things that we already know. In fact, let's not make any predictions at all. Instead, let's just look at what happened last year. For instance, what if we found out that it cost Jason $400,000 to build each of the gum stores, including inventory, store display, etc. And that each of these stores earned him $200,000 last year. That would mean, at least based on last year's results, that a typically store Jason shop chain earns $200,000 each year from an initial investment of only $400,000. This works out to 50% yearly return. On the initial cost of opening a gum store, this result is often referred to as 50% return on capital. Without knowing much else, earning $200,000 each year from a store that costs $400,000 to build sounds like a pretty good business. But here comes the hard part. Not really. What if Jason had a friend Jimbo who also had owned a chain of stores? What if you had a chance to buy a piece of Jimbo's store chain, just broccoli? What if it also cost Jimbo $400,000 to open a new store? But what if each of those stores earned only $10,000 last year? Earning $10,000 a year from a store that costs $400,000 to build works out to a 1 year return of only 2.5% or 2.5% return on capital. So here's the tough question: which business sounds better? Jason's gum shop, a business that each store earned $200,000 last year and a cost $400,000 to build, or just broccoli, a business where each store earned $10,000 last year but also cost $400,000 to build? In other words, which sounds better? A business that earns 50% return on capital, or one that earns 2.5% return on capital? Of course, the answer is obvious, and that's second point. You would rather own a business that earns a high return on capital than one that earns a low return on capital. Wax off, or paint the fence, or sand something, or whatever. But here comes the big finish. Remember how I told you this chapter was going to be hard to believe? That by using just two simple tools you could really become a stock market master. Well, believe it, you are a stock market master. How? Well, as you will see next chapter, it turns out that if you just stick to buying good companies, one that has a high return on capital, and to buying those companies only at a bargain price, at prices that give you high earnings yield, you can end up systematically buying many of the good companies that Mr. Crazy Market has decided to literally give away. You can achieve investment returns that beat the pants off even the best investment professionals, including the smartest professional I know. You can beat returns of top-notch professors and outperform every academic study ever done. In fact, you can more than double the annual returns of the stock market averages. But there's more. You can do it all by yourself. You can do it with low risk. You can do it without making any predictions. You can do it by following a simple formula that uses only the two basic concepts of just learned in this chapter. You can do it for the rest of your life, and you can choose to do it only after you are convinced that it really works. Hard to believe? Well, it's my job to prove it. Your job is to take the time to read and understand that the only reason that simple method actually works is that it makes perfect sense. First, as always, here comes a summary. 1. Paying a bargain price when you purchase a share in a business is a good thing. One way to do this is to purchase a business that earns more relatively to the prices you are paying rather than less. In other words, a higher earnings yield is better than a lower one. Second, buying a share of a good business is better than buying a share of a bad business. One way to do this is to purchase a business that can its own money at high rate of interest, rather than purchasing a business that can only invest at lower ones. In other words, businesses that earn a high return on capital are better than businesses that earn a low return on capital. Third, combining points 1 and 2, buying good businesses at bargain prices is a secret to making lots of money. And most important, don't give money to guys named Jimbo. Inbox. In fact, unless Jimbo expects those just broccoli stores to earn a lot more in the coming years, a presumption that would obviously involve making predictions about the future, it seems pretty clear that Jimbo's business is so bad he shouldn't even be building just broccoli stores. If he had a choice of building a new store for $400,000 that will earn him just 2.5% return each year on his investment, or buying a US government bond that will earn him 6% on his investment risk free, what's the point of even building a store in that first place? By opening just broccoli stores, Jimbo is actually throwing money away. Even though it looks like he's earning 2.5% on his investment in a new store, in reality he's throwing away the added 3.5% that he could earn by simply buying a risk-free US bond. Chapter 6. So, we are ready for the magic formula. Of course, you are still probably thinking it won't work, or it will be too hard, or there's something wrong with the book that even claims to have a magic formula. But if it makes you feel any better, even the great Benjamin Graham, one of the most respected and influenced pioneers in the investment field, the man who introduced us to the concept of Mr. Market and margin of safety, wrote about and used a magic formula of his own. Okay, so he didn't really call it the apparently the man had some dignity, but Graham felt that most individual investors and even many professional investors would have a hard time making type of prediction and performing the level of analysis necessary to value and invest in businesses of their own on their own. Graham featured by sharing a simple formula, one that made sense and had worked well in the past. Individual investors would be able to achieve excellent investment results with a high degree of safety. Graham's formula involved purchasing companies with stock prices were as low that the purchased price was actually lower than the proceeds that would be received from simply shutting down the business and selling off the company's asset in the fire sale. He called these stocks the various names: bargain issues, net current asset stocks, or stocks selling below the net liquidation value. Graham stated that it seems ridiculously simple to say that if one could buy a group of 20-30 companies that were cheap enough to meet the strict requirement of his formula without doing any further analysis, the result should be quite satisfactory. In fact, Graham used this formula with much success for over 30 years. Unfortunately, the formula was designed during a period when stocks were priced cheaply. For several decades after the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed, investing in stock was considered to be an extremely risky business. Investors, for the most part, were therefore unwilling to place a high value on stocks for fear of losing their money again. Although Graham's formula has continued to work for over these years, especially during periods when stock prices are particularly depressed. In today's market, there are usually few, if any, stocks that meet the strict requirements of the Graham's original formula. But that's okay. By using this formula successfully for so many years, Graham showed that a simple system of finding obviously cheap stocks could lead to safe and consistently good investment returns. If Mr. Market was willing to sell him a group of stocks at price so low that they met his formula's strict requirements, Graham figured that on average he would end up owning the basket of bargains. Sure, the low price of some of the stocks would be justified. Some companies deserve low prices because the future prospects are poor. But on average, Graham figured that the purchase made by using his formula would be bargains. Bargains created by Mr. Market, practically giving any business an unreasonably low prices. Graham suggested that by buying a group of these bargain stocks, investor could safely earn a high return without worrying for a few bad purchases and without doing complicated analysis of individual stocks. Of course, that leaves us an obvious challenge. Can we come up with a new formula, one that can beat market averages with low risk? Can we find one that not only works in today's market but one that is flexible enough to work far in future regardless of overall level of the market? Well, as you might have guessed, we can. In fact, you already know what it is. Last chapter we learned that all things being equal, if we have the choice of buying a stock which with an high earning yield, one that earns a lot relative to the price we are paying, or buying one with a low earning yield, one that earns very little relative to the price we are paying, we might as well choose one with a high earning yield. We also learned that all things being equal, if the choice is between buying shares in a company that earns a high return on capital, a company whose stores or factories earn a lot relative to the cost to build them, and buying shares in a company that earns low return on capital, or a company that stores and factories earn very little related to the cost to build them, just like broccoli, we might just well choose the one with high return on capital. So here it is. What do you think what would happen if you simply decided to buy shares in companies that have both high earning yield and high return on capital? In other words, what would happen if we decided to only buy shares in good businesses, one with high returns on capital, but only when they were available at bargain prices, priced to give us a high earnings yield? What would happen? Well, I'll tell you what would happen. We would make a lot of money, or Graham might put it as profit would be quite satisfactory. But does it make sense that something this simple and obvious would actually work in the real world? Well, to answer that question, a logical first step might be to go back and see how a disciplined strategy of buying good businesses at bargain prices would have worked in the past. As it turns out, some following a simple common sense investment strategy actually would have worked pretty well. Over the last 17 years, owning a portfolio of approximately 30 stocks that have that had the best combinations of high return on capital and high earnings yield would have returned approximately 30.8% per year, investing at a rate for 17 years. $11,000 would have turned into $1 million. Of course, for some people that might not seem like a great return. On the other hand, those people are basically nuts. During those same 17 years, the overall market averaged a return of about 12.3% every year. At the rate, $11,000 would have come into impressive $79,000, while that certainly a lot. $1 million is more, and you could have made that $1 million while taking much less risk. Than investing in the overall market, but we will talk more about that later. For now, let's just see how the magic formula was put together. In that way, we can begin to understand why such a simple formula works and why it could continue to work far into the future. Later we will learn in step-by-step fashion how to apply the magic formula to find winning investments today. But keep in mind, the mechanics aren't the important part. The computer will be doing most of the work. As you read in chapter, It will be your belief in the overwhelming logic of the magic formula that will make the formula work for you in long run. So let's try to understand how the magic formula chooses good companies at bargain prices. The formula starts with a list of the largest 3,500 companies available for trading on one of the major US stock exchanges. It then assigns rank to the companies from 1 to 3,500 based on the return on capital. The company whose business have had the highest return on capital would be assigned a rank 1, and the company with the lowest return on capital will probably a company actually losing money would receive a rank of 3,500. Similarly, the company that had the 232 rank, second best capital, would be assigned 232. Next, formula follows the same procedure, but this time the ranking is done using earnings yield. The company with the highest earnings yield is assigned a rank of 1, and the company with lowest earnings yield receives a rank of 3,500. Likewise, the company with 153rd highest earning yield out our list of 3,500 companies would be assigned a rank of 153. Finally, the formula just combines the rankings. The formula isn't looking for the company that finally the formula just combines the ranking. The formula isn't looking for the company that ranks best on return on capital or the one with highest earnings yield. Rather, the formula looks for companies that have best combination of these two factors. So, a company that ranked 232nd best in return on the capital and 153rd best in earnings yield would receive a combined rating of 385. A company that ranked first in return on capital but only 1150 best in earnings yield would receive a combined rank of 1151. If you are not a numbers person, don't worry. Just keep in mind that the companies that receive the best combined ranking are the ones that have the best combination of both factors. In the system, the company that had the 232 best return on capital could outrank the company that ranked first in return on capital. Why? Because we could purchase the company that had 232nd best return on capital and excellent ranking out of 3,500 for a very low price, enough to give us a very high return yield. 153rd cheapest out of 3,500 based on earnings yield, getting excellent ranking in both categories, though not the top ranked in either, would be better under this ranking system than being the top ranked in one category with only a pretty good ranking in the other. Pretty simple, right? But it can't be this easy. Can a portfolio of 30 or so, the highest ranked stocks, really get such great investment results? Well, consider this. Take a look at the returns that would have been achieved over the last 17 years if we had simply followed the recommendation of magic formula. See table 6.1. Oops, this can't be. The results are just too good. Surely something must be wrong here. We will really have to examine these results very closely. But let's say we leave that for the next chapter. For now, we can review the short summary and spend some more time enjoying the results from using the magic formula. They appear to be quite satisfactory. Quick summary. When Graham had a magic formula, Graham figured that purchases that could meet the strict requirement of his formula are likely to be on average bargains created by Mr. Market, practically giving away businesses at unreasonably low prices. Today, few companies meet the strict requirements outlined by Graham. We have designed a new magic formula, a formula that seeks to find good companies at bargain prices. The new formula appears to work. In fact, it appears to work too well. Before piling every penny we have into the magic formula, we should probably examine the results more closely.
Chapter 7. It ain't the things we don't know that get us in trouble, said Artenis Ward, a 19th century newspaper columnist. It's the things we know that ain't so. And that, in a nutshell, is our problem. The magic formula looks like it works. In fact, the results are so good that there hardly be any argument. And of course, we want it to work. Who wouldn't want to make lots of money without trying at all that hard? But does the magic formula really work? Sure, all the numbers look good, but do we know where they come from or who they have been with? For that matter, more important, do we know where they are going? Even if the formula worked in the past, are we merely learning how to fight the last war? Will the formula continue to work in the future? Good question, certainly. Before what we learned from last chapter get us into too much trouble, let's see if we have some good answers. First, where did all those numbers come from? They are often a problem when looking back and making assumptions about what could have been accomplished in the past. While a computer stock picking formula may appear to be generated spectacular theoretical returns, duplicating those results in the real world may be quite difficult. For instance, the magic formula may be picking companies that are also so small that few people can really buy them. Often, small companies have very few shares available for purchase. Even a small amount of demand for those shares can push share prices higher. If that's the case, the formula may look good on paper, but in the real world, a fantastic result can't be replicated. That's why it's important that the company chose by the magic formula be pretty large. Last chapter, the magic formula ranked 3,500 of the largest US companies available for trading on the major US stock exchanges. The formula then chose its favorite stock from the group. Even the very smallest of these 3,500 companies still had a market value, the number share times the stock price, over $50 million. With companies of that size, include individual investors would be able to buy a reasonable number of shares without pushing higher prices. But let's see what happened when we raise the bar a little bit. It would certainly be nice if the magic formula worked for companies whether they were large or small. That way we could be more confident that the basic principle of buying good companies at bargain price begins for companies at any size. So instead of choosing from largest 3,500 companies, let's look at just the largest 2,500 companies. The smallest company in the group has a market value of at least $200 million. Over the last 70 years, ending in December 2004, the magic formula worked remarkably well for this group of larger companies too. Owning a portfolio of 30 stocks chosen by the magic formula would be achieved on an annual return of 23.7%. During the same period, the market average return from this group was 12.4% per year. In other words, the magic formula practically doubled the market's average annual year return. But what if we take it one step further? Let's look back and see what happened when we narrowed the group to just 10,000 stock. Only the companies with market values over $1 billion, even large institutional investors like mutual funds and large pension funds can buy the stocks. Well, take a look at this. Table 7.1. Once again, it appears that even the largest investors can practically double the market's compounded annually return simply by placing the magic formula. But this can't be. There must be a catch. It just looks too darn easy. And of course, there may still be some problem. It's just that the problem of a magic formula that works only on a paper but not in real life isn't one of them. Okay, so the companies chosen by the magic formula aren't too small for investors to buy. But how about this? Maybe the magic formula just got lucky with a few stock picks, and that's why the whole average looks good. If the magic formula doesn't stay lucky, relying on past results could be very dangerous. Fortunately, it's very unlikely that luck was much of a factor at all. Throughout the 17 years of our study, we hold a portfolio of roughly 30 stocks. Each stock selection was held for a period of 1 year. Each stock selection was held for a period of 1 year. In all, over 1,500 different stocks picks were made for each of these tests. Largest 3,500 stocks, largest 2,500 stocks, and largest 1,000 stocks. When we combine all our tests, they are the results of over 4,500 separate magic formula selections. So it would be very difficult to argue that luck was a major factor. But there may be some other problems, right? How about this? While it's pretty nice that the magic formula can find 30 good companies that Mr. Market has decided to throw away at a bargain price, what if it can't? What if those bargain opportunities were to disappear for some reason? What if markets simply wised up a bit and stopped offering us those few incredible bargains? If that happened, we would be out of luck. So let's try a little experiment. Starting with the largest 2,500 companies, what if we ranked them again using the magic formula? In other words, what if we ranked the 1 to 2,500 from best to worst? Remember, the formula is looking for companies that have the best combination of a high return on capital and a high earnings yield. So the companies that appear to be a good businesses and available bargain price would be ranked closer to number 1. While the companies losing lots of money that were offered at expensive prices would be ranked closer to 2,500. Now, what if we divided the 2,500 companies into 10 equal groups based on their rankings? In other words, group 1 would contain the 2,500 companies that the magic formula viewed as good companies at bargain prices. Group 2 would be second highest ranked group of 250 companies. Group 3 would be third highest ranked group, or so on. Group 10 therefore would be group of 250 stocks that magic formula ranked as being poor companies at expensive prices. So what would happen if we did this every month for 17 years? What if we held each of these stock portfolios, each containing roughly 250 stocks, for 1 year and calculated the returns? Well, take a look at table 7.2. That's interesting. The magic formula doesn't just work for only 30 stocks. Magic formula appears to work in order. The best ranked stocks perform the best, and as the ranking drops, so does the returns. Group 1 beats Group 2, Group 2 beats Group 3, Group 3 beats Group 4, and so on. Straight down the line, Group 1 to Group 10. Group 1 is our best ranked stocks, beats 10. Group 10 our worst ranked stocks by over 15% a year. That's pretty amazing. In fact, it appears as though the magic formula can predict the future. If we know how a group of companies is ranked by magic formula, we have a pretty good idea of how well the group will perform on average as an investment in the future. That also means that if we can't for some reason buy the top 30 stocks as ranked by the magic formula, it's no big deal. Buying the next 30 would pretty well also. So should the next 30, in fact the whole group of top ranked stocks, appear to do well, that may also solve one of our other potential problems. Remember how Ben Graham had his own magic formula? Buying a group of stocks that could meet the strict requirements of Graham's formula was a great way to make money. Unfortunately, in today's market, few, if any, company qualify the purchase under Graham's original formula. That means Graham's formula isn't as useful as it once was. Fortunately, our magic formula doesn't seem to have that problem. It is merely a ranking formula. By definition, there always have to be stocks that rank to at the top. Not only that, because the formula appears to work in order, we are not limited to the top 30 stocks. Since the entire group of top ranked stocks does well, there would always be plenty of high performing stocks to choose from. For those of you keen keeping score on the sidelines, isn't easy pretty good for magic formula? Come on. That ranking stocks in order thing, man, that's pretty scary. It's been nice arguing back and forth about whether the formula really works, but the winner of that battle is pretty obvious. Maybe we should just stop the fight right now. Better before somebody gets hurt. Alas, not so fast. Sure, the evidence is pretty convincing, but all that means is that the magic formula has worked in the past. How do we know that magic formula will continue to work in the future? After all, with me being such a blabbermouth, why won't everyone start using it? Won't that ruin everything? Well, after we look at the summary, let's see. First, magic formula works for companies both large and small. The magic formula was extensively tested. The great returns do not appear to be a matter of luck. The magic formula ranks stocks in order. As a result, there should always be plenty of highly ranked stocks to choose from. The magic formula has been an incredibly accurate indicator of how a group of stocks will perform in future. Next chapter, we will have to discuss whether the magic formula can continue to get such great results. That would be nice.
Chapter 8. I admit it, my knowledge of history is little fuzzy. I guess I should have listened better in class. But there's one part of our history that has always baffled me. I never really understood how we won the Revolutionary War. Here we were, these 13 little colonies, up against the strongest country in the world. England had their best navy, their mightiest army, the most money, and yet our scrappy little ragtag group of soldiers pulled over the victory. How that happened? Well, I have a theory. Given my limited knowledge, I don't know whether my theory has been extensively studied, but the way I see it, we won because we were fighting a bunch of complete idiots. After all, the British strategy left a lot to be desired. On one side, you had British soldiers standing in plain sight, perfectly lined up, wearing of all things bright red coats while shooting in unison. I'm sure it looked quite nice. On the other side, you had our guys, a messy, disorganized horde of soldiers, hiding behind rocks and trees, shooting back at a bunch of conventionally arranged bright red targets. No wonder we won. But here's the part I don't get. I can't imagine this was the first time the British fought like that. In other words, despite what I think, the British way of fighting must have actually worked in the past. My only question is how. For all I know, they had been doing it that way for hundreds of years, and apparently, whether it makes sense to me or not, with a great deal of success, yet following the same game plan that had worked so well in the past clearly wasn't a good strategy going forward. The British found that out the hard way. So, what about us? We are about to march off armed with what looks like a great game plan. We have a magic formula that makes sense and has produced phenomenal results in the past. We expect to have a lot of success with it in the future. But before we all line up to collect our money, we better stop and think about one obvious problem. How can our strategy keep working after everyone knows about it? If we can't find a good answer like the British, we may end up just another easy target. Well, first, here's some really good news. As it turns out, there are plenty of times when the magic formula doesn't work at all. Isn't that great? In fact, on average, in 5 months out of each year, the magic formula portfolio worse does worse than the overall market. But forget months. Often the magic formula doesn't work for a full year or even more. That's even better. Imagine buying a book that tells you invest real money in a group of stocks which names your spit out by a computer. Imagine diligently watching those stocks each day as they do worse than the market averages over the course of many months or even years. Now imagine deciding enough is enough. No more trusting the stupid book and that mindless computer. You are going to roll up your sleeves and investigate these companies you purchased and the outlook for the business you actually own. As we will find out later, imagine the horror when you realize that if you had only investigated these companies for a few minutes before buying your shares, there is no way you would have touched many of them. Finally, despite awful performance and disagreeable prospect of the stocks that you own, imagine vowing to continue following the advice of the stupid book and that mindless computer. But why even worry about all this? After all, the magic formula works. We proved it last chapter. We are going to do really well. So there's no need to worry about months or years of poor performance. And though that sounds right, unfortunately, looking at the statistics for only our very successful 17-year test period, it turns out there's actually plenty to worry about. The magic formula portfolio fared poorly related to market averages in 5 out of 12 months tested. For full year period, the magic formula failed to beat the market averages once every 4 years. For 1 out of every 6 period tested, the magic formula did poorly for more than 2 years in a row. During those wonderful 17 years for the magic formula, there were even some periods when the formula did worse than the overall market 3 years in a row. Think it's easy to stick with a formula that hasn't worked for several years. Do you think the typical reaction goes something like, I don't know, this hasn't worked for a long time, or I know I just lost a lot of money, but let's keep doing what we are doing? I assure you, it's not. Take for example the case of the author with the best-selling investment book. For this book, the author tested dozens of stock picking formulas over a period of many decades to determine which of the strategies had beaten the market over long run. The book was excellent and well reasoned. The author then opened a mutual fund based on buying only those stocks picked by the most successful formula of the dozens that he had tested. The fund then proceeded to perform worse than the major market averages for 2 of its first 3 years. For one of those years, the fund underperformed the market average by 25%. After 3 years, the fund was performing poorly relative to competing funds and best-selling author. The guy who did the test, the guy who wrote the book, decided to sell his fund management company to somebody else. In fairness, I don't think the author gave up his formula. He saw better opportunities elsewhere. Had he known that the same fund, the one managed strictly according to his formula, would come back over the next 3 years, but that's not unusual. The unpredictability of Mr. Market's mood and the pressure of competing with other money managers can make it really hard to stick with strategy that hasn't worked for years. That goes for any strategy, no matter how sensible and regardless of how good the long-term track record is. Let's take a look at the experience of a good friend of mine who happens to be the smartest money manager I know. Though he doesn't automatically buy stocks that a computer-based formula spits out, he does follow a disciplined strategy of choosing companies to buy only from the list of companies his formula ranks the highest. He used this strategy successfully for 10 years at his previous investment firm, and 9 years ago he set out to form his own money management firm using the same basic principles. Business wasn't too good for the first 3 or 4 years, as the same strategy that had been so successful in the past drastically underperformed the returns of competing money management firms and the major market averages. Nevertheless, the smartest money manager I know strongly believed that his strategy still tremendous sense in the long run and that he should continue following the same course as always. Unfortunately, the clients disagreed. The vast majority of them ran for the exits, pulling their money away in the large numbers, most likely to give it to a manager who, unlike friend, knew what he was doing. As you guessed, they should have stuck around. The last 5 or 6 years have been so good for my friend and his strategy that now the investment record of his firm since its inception, once again including the tough first few years, has trounced the returns of the major market averages over the comparable time frame. Today it stands among the top only a small handful of firms with extraordinary investment records out of the thousands of investment firms on Wall Street. To prove that sometimes good things do come to those who wait, my friend firm now manages $10 billion for hundreds of clients. Too bad that in face of several years of underperformance, most choose not to wait. Only 4 original clients remain. Luckily, I am one of them, though as his friend I probably had to stick around. So, what's the point? The point is that if the magic formula worked all the time, everyone would probably use it. If everyone used it, it probably would stop working. So, many people would be buying the shares of the bargain price selected by the magic formula, that the prices of those shares would be pushed higher almost immediately. In other words, if everyone used for the formula, the bargains would disappear and the magic formula would be ruined. That's why we are so lucky that magic formula isn't that great. It doesn't work all the time. In fact, it might not work for years. Most people just won't wait that long. Their investment time horizon is too short. If a strategy works in the long run, means it sometimes takes 3 or 4 or even 5 years to show stuff, most people won't stick with it. After 2 years or two of the performing worse than the market averages or earning lower returns than their friends, most people look for a new strategy, usually one that has well over the past few years. Even professional money managers who believe that strategy will work over the long term have hard time sticking with it. After a few years of poor performance relative to the market or to their competitors, a vast majority of clients and investors just leave. That's why it's hard to stay with a strategy that doesn't follow along with everyone else's. As a professional manager, if you do poorly while everyone else is doing well, you run the risk of losing all your clients and possibly your job. Many managers feel the only way to avoid the risk is to invest pretty much the way everyone else does. Often this means owning the most popular companies, usually the ones whose prospects looks most promising over the next few quarters and the next year or two. Perhaps now you are beginning to see why most everyone else won't be using the magic formula. Though some may take it out for a spin, most won't last the few months or years of poor performance. As we discussed back in chapter 1, you are also beginning to see why all that having to believe stuff is so important. It is, if you don't believe the magic formula will work for you, you will most likely quit before it has a chance to work. At least there's at least that's where the statistics over the last 17 years seem to point. The magic formula works. Long-term annual returns of double or in some cases almost triple the returns of the market averages. Only those good returns can be pretty lumpy over shorter period. It may work or it may not. When it comes to the magic formula, shorter periods can often mean years, not days or months. In a strange but logical way, that's the good news. Good news, that is, if you believe enough in the magic formula to stick with it over the long term, but to truly stick with a strategy that hasn't worked in many years, you are going to have to really believe in it deep down in your bones. Sure, the spectacular track record of the magic formula will help, but let's see what your bones think of the next chapter. Quick summary. The magic formula appears to work well over a long period. Second, the magic formula often doesn't work for several years in a row. Third, most investors won't or can't stick with a strategy that hasn't worked for several years in a row. Fourth, for the magic formula to work for you, you must believe that it will work and maintain a long-term investment horizon. Fifth, if it wasn't for this chapter, the next chapter would be most important chapter in the book. Chapter 9. Vomit under the 3M spaces and run. Now there is a saying you don't hear every day. The main reason you don't hear it pretty much is pretty straightforward. Over time the phrase has lost all its meaning. In fact, I really only needed it to pass my 8th grade course in a print shop. You see, old time printers used to set type by hand and actually picked letters individually out of a box. To pass the course, my fellow middle schoolers and I forced to memorize the location of these letters. The letters in the bottom row were VUT, then something called 3M spaces, followed by letter AR. We remembered the order of catchy phrase vomit under the 3M spaces and run. Under the evident of computers, my little memory device and print shop for that matter is now useless. Of course, the world has changed a lot since I was in middle school. No one teaches print shop anymore. Thankfully, though some subjects haven't changed, maths class for one is still pretty much the same. As investors, that's really important to know. That's because in order to be for the magic formula to work, make us very long run, the principle behind it must appear not only sensible and logical but timeless. Otherwise, there is no way we will able to hang on. When our short-term results turn against us, as simple as it may seem, knowing that 2 plus 2 always equals 4 is pretty powerful concept. No matter how many people tell us differently, no matter how long they tell us, no matter how smart all these people appear to be, we are unlikely to waver from our conviction in a similar way. Our level of confidence in a magic formula will determine whether we can hang up on the strategy that may be both unpopular and unsuccessful for seemingly long periods of time. So what is the magic formula that makes so much sense, in fact, that we don't waver when things turn against us? Well, let's take another look. The magic formula chooses companies through a ranking system. Those companies that have both a high return on capital and high earnings yield are the ones that the formula ranks as best. Put more simply, the formula is systematically helping us find above average companies that we can buy at below average price. That certainly sounds logical and sensible. If indeed that's what we are really doing, it sounds like a strategy we can truly believe in. So let's go step by step and see whether that's true. First, why are companies that earn a high return on capital so special? What kind of companies is our formula telling us to buy? What makes the above average? To understand the answers to the questions, let's go back and check with our old friend Jason. Last year, as you may remember, what was a pretty good year for Jason's business. Each of his gum shop earned 200,000. Since he had only to invest 400,000 to build each store, including inventory, store display, etc., that meant that his return on capital for opening a gum shop was pretty impressive, 50%. What does that mean? Most people and most businesses can't find an investment that will return a 50% annual return. If the past year is a good guidance and Jason's company can really earn 50% a year on its money by simply another store, that makes Jason's gum shops a pretty special business. Think about that. Having the opportunity to invest your money and earn 50% a year is pretty rare. While it's true that there is no guarantee that Jason's next new stores or his old stores will continue to earn 50% returns each year on their original cost, last year's high returns may be a good indicator of the opportunity to earn high returns from investing in that same way going forward, same business going forward. If if that's true, Jason's Gum Shops can continue to higher returns from its investment in old and new stores. That's really good news for Jason. First, that's many means that the profit from Jason's business don't have to just sit there. While Jason's Gum Shops could take those earnings and invest in government bonds by paying 6% per year, that have a much better option. The company can take those earnings and invest them in a new store. So not only will the original investment of first store continue and earn 50% per year, but Jason's Gum Shop has a chance to invest profits on the first store that may also earn 50% a year. This opportunity to invest profits at a high rate of return in is very valuable. For example, if Jason's Gum Shop earned 200,000 last year, Jason has few options. He can distribute that money to the shareholders of the business. The shareholders can then invest the money however they choose. If the business doesn't change much this coming year, Jason's Gum Shops will earn 200,000 again. That may be fine outcome. But if instead Jason's Gum Shop take 200,000 profit and invest them in government bonds paying 3.6% after taxes at a 640% rate, Jason's business could earn 207,200 this coming year. 2,000 from the store, 7,200 after tax profit and interest on the bond. Though earning would be higher than last year, the growth rate in earnings would be not be very high. But here's where the big bucks roll in. If Jason takes 200,000 in profit and can invest in a store that earns 50,000 annual return, the earnings from Jason's Gum Shops will grow 300,000 in the coming year. 200,000 from the original store and an additional 100,000 from the investment in the new store. Going from 200,000 in the earning last year to 300,000 in the coming year would represent a 50% earnings growth rate in 1 year. In other words, owning a business that has the opportunity to invest some or all its profit at a very high rate of return can contribute to a very high rate of earnings growth. So now we know two important things about businesses that can earn high return on capital. First, businesses that can earn high return on capital may also have the opportunity to invest their profits at very high rates of return. Since most people and the business can invest their money at only average rate of return, the opportunity is something special. Second, as we just learned, the ability to earn a high return on the capital may also contribute to a high return on earnings growth. Certainly, that's good news for the companies chosen by the magic formula. But that still leaves us with one obvious question. If a business like Jason's really can make 50% a year by opening a gum shop, why won't other people see that and start opening their own gum shops? That would mean more competition from Jason's Gum Shop. More competition would mean that Jason will sell less gum in each of his stores. More competition could mean that Jason could much lower his prices to attract businesses. More competition could mean that someone built a better gum shop. In short, more competition could mean lower profits going forward for Jason's Gum Shops. In fact, that's how our system capitalism works. Good businesses attract competition. Even if competing gum shops open up and return on capital for opening a new Jason's Gum Shop drops to over 40%, the threat to future profits might not end there. Earning 40% annual returns from opening a gum shop is still quite good. People might see those 40% annual returns from opening a gum shop at a very attractive and decide to open their own gum shop. Then, due to increased competition, returns may fall all the way to 30% per year from building a new gum shop. Even if there might not stop. Earning 30% a year on an investment is also good. More competition could continue to drive down future returns on capital from new stores and from old stores that are already built. The whole capitalism thing could result in profit continuing spiral downward until the annual returns on capital from owning gum stores isn't so great anymore. Some system. But here's the thing, if capitalism is such a tough system, how does the magic formula find us companies that are able to earn a high return on capital in the first place? To earn a high return on capital even for 1 year, it's likely that at least temporarily there is something special about the company's business. Otherwise, competition would already have driven down returns on capital to lower levels. It could be that the company has relatively new business concepts, perhaps a candy store that sells only gum, or a new store like a hot video game, or better products such as an iPod that's smaller and easier to use than competitor products. A good brand name, people will happily pay for a Coke than Joe's Cola, or Coke can charge more than Joe's and continue to earn higher return on capital despite having a competition. Or a company could have a very strong competitive position. eBay was one of the first auction websites and has more buyers and sellers than anyone else. So it's hard for new auction websites to offer the same benefits to customers. In short, companies that achieve a high return on capital are likely to have special advantage of some kind. That special advantage keeps competitors from destroying the ability to earn above average profits. Businesses that don't have anything special going for them, such as new or better products, well-known brand name, or strong competitive positions, are likely to return only average or below average returns on capital. If there's nothing special about a company's business, then it's easy for someone to come in and start a competing businesses. If a business is earning high return on capital and it's easy to compete, eventually someone will. They will keep competing until returns on capital are driven down to average levels. But the magic formula doesn't choose companies with average returns on capital. It doesn't choose companies with below average return on capital either. Businesses just like broccoli are unlikely to earn a high return on capital for even a year. So by eliminating companies that earn orderly or poor returns on capital, magic formula starts with a group of companies that have a high return on capital. Sure, some of the companies chosen by the magic formula won't be able to maintain their high return on capital. As we just learned, businesses with high return on capital to attract competition. Also, every mediocre business can have a good year or two and temporarily achieve high returns on capital. But on average, high return on capital companies chosen by the magic formula are more likely to have the opportunity to reinvest a portion of their profits at a high rate of return. They are more likely to have ability to achieve high rates of earnings growth. They are also more likely to have some special competitive advantage that will allow them to continue to earn an above average return on capital. In other words, on average, the magic formula is finding us good companies. And what does the magic formula do with this group of companies? It tries to buy them at bargain prices. The formula chooses only good companies that also have high earnings yield. Only high earnings yield means that formula would buy only those companies that earn a lot compared to the price we are paying. Buying above average companies at below average price, it sounds like it should work. But how do your bones feel about that? Quick summary. First, most people and businesses can't find investments that will earn very high rate of returns. A company that earn a high return on capital is therefore very special. Second, companies that earn a high return on capital may also have opportunity to invest some or all their profits at a high rate of return. This opportunity is very valuable. It can contribute to a high rate of earnings growth. Companies that achieve a high return on capital are likely to have a special advantage of some kind. That special advantage keeps competitors from destroying their ability to earn above average profits. But by eliminating companies that earn ordinary or poor returns on capital, the magic formula starts with a group of companies that have a high return on capital. If It then tries to buy this above average companies at below average's price. Since the magic formula makes overwhelming sense, we should be able to stick with it during good times and bad. And finally, if you must vomit under the 3M spaces, don't forget to run. Chapter 10, page number 88. I love sailing. I am not a very good at sailing. I know this not just from the fact that my wife and kids are scared to go with me, but from hard experience. Only through a silent miscalculation of wind and water speed, I was 20 feet away from being slammed by a barge at least 3 football fields long. I remember that quite well because I had my wife as a passenger who hates boats anyways. While I was busy pulling the starter cord on my little 5 horsepower outboard engine, darn thing never works when you really need it. As the giant barge blasted its horn for me to get out of the way. Usually, sailboats might have the right of way over motorboats, but since 9 billion pounds barge don't steer all that quickly, the right of way things get stitched around. Good to keep in mind if it ever comes up. So there I was repeatedly pulling the worthless starter cord while trying to act like I had everything under control. So there I was, repeatedly pulling the worthless starter cord while trying to act like I had everything under control. Just so my wife's last words wouldn't be, I hate this stupid boat. When a final puff of wind helped us sail out of danger. I am recounting this story not because I enjoy sailing alone. I actually like having company, preferably brave or blind company. I am telling you this because even though I am clearly not a good sailor, I still love sailing. And that's the same way many people feel about investing in the stock market. They may not be particularly good at it, or they may know whether they are any good at it, but there is something about the process or the experience that they enjoy. For some of these people, investing by using a magic formula may take away some fun of that. I understand this. There are also people who are good or would be good at picking individual stocks without using magic formula, and that's fine too. Next chapter would give both groups an idea what they will need to know if they want to be successful at picking stocks on their own. It should also show them how the principles behind the magic formula can still be used to guide individual investment decisions. But before even thinking about whether to go forward investing with or without the magic formula, there is still few more things you should know. First, the magic formula has a better track record than I have been letting on. I didn't reveal this good news earlier for a reason. A good track record is not why you should want to follow the magic formula. A good track record is not why you will have good results in the future. A good track record is not why you will keep following the magic formula even when the results turn against you. The truth is that a good track record only helps you once you understand why the track record is so good. Now that you do simply put the magic formula makes perfect sense, I can trust you not to get carried away by such with a little more good news. As you recall, the magic formula was tested over a recent 17-year period. A portfolio of approximately 30 stocks selected by the magic formula was held throughout the time, with each individual stock selection held for a period of 1 year. Performance was then measured over 193 separate 1 year periods. The stock portfolios chosen by the magic formula usually beat the market averages, but there were 1, 2, and even 3 year long periods when these was not the case. This created the risk that investors might give up the formula before it had a chance its magic. As we discussed, over one period, the magic formula stock portfolios underperformed the market averages in 1 out of every 4 years tested. Following the formula for any 2 year period in a row, starting with months during the 17 years, the magic formula underperformed the market averages in 1 of every 6 period tested. Remember, while that was not sound all that bad, underperforming for 2 years in a row is actually pretty hard to take. But here comes the good news. Following the formula for 3 years period in a row, magic formula beat the averages by 95% time. 160 out of 169 3-year period tested. But that's not all. Over 3 periods, if you followed the magic formula, you would never have lost money. That's right. Sticking with the magic formula for 3 years period during those 17 years, you would make 100% of the time. 169 out of 169. 3 years period of the 169 separate 3-year period tested, the worst return on the magic formula was gain of 11%. The worst return over a 3 period for a market averages was loss of 46%. That's a pretty big difference. But that's still not all. All those numbers you just read about were as based on the result achieved by choosing from only the largest 1,000 stocks, those with a market value of over $1 billion. The results from choosing from the largest 3,500 stocks, market values over $50 million, a group of stocks individual investors can really buy, were even better. Every 3-year period tested, 169 out of 169 was positive for magic formula portfolio, and every 3-year period beat the market averages, 169 out of 169. That's right. The magic formula beat the market averages in every single period. Hey, maybe there is something to this magic formula after all. But can we really expect such great results without taking any risk? Well, the answer often depends on how you look at risk. Although over the last 50 years, professors in the financial field have come up with interesting ways to measure or compare the risk of different investment strategies. Most of these involve measuring risk in a way that should have no meaning to you. This is true especially if you choose to invest with a truly long-term horizon. When thinking about risk, rather than making things uncertainly complicated, there are really two main things you should want to know about an investment strategy. First, what is the risk of losing money following the strategy over the long term? Second, what is the risk that your chosen strategy will perform worse than alternative strategies over the long term? So, how does the magic formula stack up the risk of definition? Since it is fairly easy to design an investment strategy to equal the returns of the market averages, and yet, as we will discuss later, most professional investors do even worse than the market averages. We can at the very least make a reasonable comparison of these two simple strategies. So let's see. During our test period and using a relatively short 3-year time frame, the magic formula strategy did pretty darn well. The returns from the magic formula strategy were far superior to the returns of the market averages. The magic formula strategy never lost money. Magic formula strategy beat the market averages over almost every single 3-year period tested. In short, the magic formula strategy achieved better results with less risk than market averages. Though sticking with the magic formula strategy for even 3 years paid off incredibly well, during our test period, this may not always be the case. Even superior investment strategies may take a long time to show their stuff. In an investment strategy truly makes sense, the longer the time horizon you maintain, the better your chances of ultimate success. Time horizon of 5, 10 or even 20 years are ideal. Though not easy to do, even maintaining a 3 to 5 year horizon of your stock market investment should give you a large advantage over most investors. It is also the minimum time frame for any meaningful comparison of the risk and result of alternative investment strategies. We now have a better understanding of just how powerful and low risk the magic formula tool is. But we still have one problem left to solve before we can move on to the next chapter. It has to do with old friend Mr. Market, and maintaining a proper time horizon plays a key role here. As you may recall, from the first day of business school in chapter 4, it is Mr. Market's constantly changing emotional state that creates bargain opportunities in the magic formula is able to put to its disadvantage to its advantage. But these same emotions create a problem. If Mr. Market is so unstable, how can we be sure that he will surely pay a fair price for our bargains purchases? If we don't eventually use a fair price for Mr. Market, a bargain could remain a bargain forever, or worse, even become even more a bargain. So here's the thing you need to know about Mr. Market. Over the short term, Mr. Market acts like a wildly emotional guy who can buy or sell stocks at depressed or inflated prices. Over the long run, it's completely different story. Mr. Market gets it right. Yep. Over long term, crazy Mr. Market, actually very rational fellow. It may take a few weeks or a few months or even not infrequently a few years, but eventually Mr. Market will pay a fair price of his shares. I actually get a guarantee to get my MBA students at the beginning of each semester. I guarantee them that if they do a good job valuing the company, Mr. Market will eventually agree with them. I tell that though it can occasionally take longer if their analysis is correct, 2 to 3 years is actually all the time they will have to wait for Mr. Market to reward their bargain purchases with a fair price. How can this be? Isn't Mr. Market an emotional based case? Well, though it's true that Mr. Market can often be ruled by emotion over the short term, over time facts and reality take over. If the price of stock has been beaten down unfairly in short term by an overly emotional Mr. Market, this could happen, for instance, when a company announces some bad news or is expected to receive some bad news in the near future. A few things can take place. First, there are a lot of smart people out there. If the price offered by Mr. Market is truly a bargain, some of these people will eventually recognize the bargain opportunity, buy stock and push the price closer to the fair value. This doesn't have to happen right away. Sometimes uncertainty about the prospects for a particular company over the near term will keep potential buyers away. Sometimes influence of emotions can last for years, but here's the thing, eventually the problem or the reason for the emotional reaction is resolved. It could be a positive resolution or a negative one. It doesn't really matter. If there is uncertainty about a company's earnings over the next 2 or 3 years, by waiting long enough, we eventually find out the answer. Even if this takes the full 2 or 3 years, once the reality of the situation is known, smart investors will buy stock if the bargain opportunity still exists. Second, even if these so-called smart people don't recognize the bargain opportunity and buy shares, there are other ways that stock prices can move towards fair value. Often companies buy their own shares if a company believes its shares are undervalued. The management of the company can decide that if it is good investment to use its own cash and repurchase some of the company's shares. So this action of companies buying their own shares is another activity that causes prices to rise, and many help eliminate some bargain opportunities. If that doesn't work, there are still other ways that share prices tend to move towards fair value. Remember, a share of stock represents an ownership interest in a small actual company. Anyone who buys all the shares outstanding would then own the entire company. Often it's a bargain opportunity persists for too long. Another company or a large investment firm may decide to make a bid for all the shares outstanding and purchase the entire company. Sometimes even the possibility that a buyer for the whole company may emerge can cause share prices to rise towards the fair value. In short, over time, the interaction of all these things, smart investors searching for bargaining opportunities, buying back their own shares, and the takeover of possibility of takeover of an entire company, work together to move share prices towards a fair value. Sometimes the process works quickly, and sometimes it takes several years. Although over the short term, Mr. Market may set stock price based on emotion, over the long term, it is value of the company that becomes most important to Mr. Market. This means that if you buy shares at what you believe to be bargain price and you are right, Mr. Market will eventually agree and offer to buy those shares at the fair price. In other words, bargain purchases will be rewarded. Though the price doesn't always work quickly, 2 to 3 years is usually enough time for Mr. Market to get things right. So now that we have that good news out of the way, let's see if we can sail through the next chapter without hitting anything. Quick summary. The magic formula works. It works even better than I let on before. The magic formula achieved its far superior results with far less risk than the market averages. Although over the short term, Mr. Market may price stocks based on emotion, over the long term, Mr. Market prices stocks based on the value. If you couldn't vomit under the 3M spaces, try sailing with me.
Chapter 11, page number 100. So, the magic formula isn't your thing. The high returns, the low risk, simplicity, the logic, these things mean nothing to you. You want, in fact, you need to pick stocks all by yourself. No one, and especially no silly formula, is going to stand in your way. You are there on the ledge, and there's no use talking you down. Don't worry, I get it, and that's just fine. But to borrow from something I once wrote, remember that choosing individual stocks without any idea of what you are looking for is like running through a dynamite factory with a burning match. You may live, but then you are still an idiot. So, how can you pick stocks intelligently? What should you be looking for? Even if you are decided not to follow the magic formula, how can you still use it to keep from blowing yourself up? Well, glad you asked. Let's see. As we already know, the magic formula picks stocks that have both a high earnings yield and high return on capital. For high earnings yield, the formula looks for companies that earn a lot compared to their price we have paid. As we already know, the magic formula picks stocks that have both a high earning yield and a high return on capital. For earning yield, the formula looks for companies that earn a lot compared to the price we pay. For return on capital, the formula looks for companies that earn a lot compared to how much the company has to pay to buy the assets that created those earnings. To calculate these ratios, the magic formula doesn't look at future earnings. That's too hard. The magic formula uses last year's earnings. The funny thing is that seems like the wrong thing to do. The value of a company comes from how much money it will earn for us in the future, not from what happened in the past. If a company earned $2 per share last year but will earn only $1 per share this year and even less in the future, using last year's earnings to calculate earnings yield and return on capital will be very misleading. But that's precisely what the magic formula does. In fact, often the near-term prospects for the companies selected by the magic formula doesn't look so good. In many cases, the outlook for next year or two is downright ugly. But that's one reason the magic formula can find companies whose price seems like bargains. The magic formula uses last year's earnings. If instead estimates for the last year or next year's earnings were used, many of the companies selected by the magic formula might not look like such bargains at all. So what should we be doing? Ideally, better than blindly plugging in last year's earnings to the formula, we should plug in estimates for earnings in a normal year.
Hashtag. A normal year is one in which nothing extraordinary or unusual is happening within the company, industry or overall economy. Of course, last year's earnings could be a representative of a normal year, but last year may not have been typical for a number of reasons. Earnings could have been higher than normal due to extraordinary favor conditions that have not been repeated in many years. Alternatively, there may have been a temporary problem with the company's operation and earnings may have been lower than in the normal year. Plugging in estimates from next year's earnings to our formula may suffer from the same problem. Next year may not be typical. So, one solution might be to look ahead even further to our estimates of what earnings will be there or 3 or 4 years from now in a normal or average environment. Short-term issues that may have affected last year's earnings or that may affect earnings over the next year or two could then largely be eliminated from our thinking. In this ideal world, we would then be able to take our estimates of normal earnings and calculate earnings yields and return on capital. Using this principle of the magic formula, we could look into companies that had both a high earnings yield and a high returns on capital based on normal earnings. Of course, we would also need to assess how confident we were in our estimates and make a judgment on whether those earnings were likely to grow in the future. We could then compare the earnings yield based on normal earnings to a risk-free 6% government bond and to our other investment opportunities. So, does that sound hard to do? Well, it is. Yet, it's not impossible. There are people who can do this type of analysis. In fact, this is precisely the way partners and I use the principles behind my formula to make our investment decisions. But if you can't do this type of analysis, and here comes the main point of the chapter, you have no business investing in individual stocks of your own. That's right, forget about it. But wait a second, the magic formula does pretty well and it just uses last year's earnings. It doesn't make any estimates and it doesn't even do any thinking. How come the magic formula gets to pick stocks and I am telling most of you to forget about the picking individual stocks on your own? Well, the answer is magic formula doesn't pick individual stocks either. It picks many stocks at one time. Looking at a whole portfolio of stocks, it turns out that using last year's earnings is often a good indicator of what earnings will look like in the future. Of course, for individual companies this may not be the case, but an average last year's earnings will often provide a pretty good estimate for normal earnings going forward. That's why if we actually use the magic formula, we'll want to own 20 or 30 stocks at one time. In the magic formula's case, we want the average, that is the average return for a portfolio of stock chosen by the magic formula. Since average results for the magic formula will hopefully mean extraordinary investment returns, owning many different stocks chosen by magic formula should help ensure that we stay pretty close to that average. Plugging in estimates from next year's earnings to our formula may suffer from the same problem. Next year may not be typical. So one solution might be to look ahead even further to our estimates of what earnings will be 3 or 4 years from now in normal or average environment. Short-term issues that may have affected last year's earnings or that may affect earnings over the next year or two could then largely be eliminated by thinking. In ideal world, we would be able to take our estimates of normal earnings and calculate earnings yield and return on capital using the principles of magic formula We could look for companies that had both a high earnings yield and a high return on capital based on normal earnings. Of course, we would also need to assess how confident we were in our estimates and make a judgment on whether those earnings were likely to grow in the future. We could then compare the earnings yield based on normal earnings to a risk-free 6% government bond and to our other investment opportunities. Does that sound hard to do? Well, it is. Yet, it is not impossible. There are people who can do this type of analysis. In fact, this is precisely the way my partners and I use the principles behind the magic formula to make our own investment decisions. If you can't do this type of analysis, and here comes the main point of the chapter, you have no business investing in individual stocks on your own. That's right, forget about it. But wait a second, the magic formula does pretty well and it just uses last year's earnings. It doesn't make any estimates and it doesn't even do any thinking. How come the magic formula gets to pick stocks and I am telling you most of you to just forget about picking individual stocks on your own? Well, the answer is the magic formula doesn't pick any individual stocks. Either it picks many stocks at one time. Looking at the whole portfolio of stocks, it turns out that using last year's earnings is often a good indicator of what earnings will look like in the future. Of course, for individual companies, this may not be the case, but on average, last year's earnings will often provide a pretty good estimate for normal earnings going forward. That's why if we actually use the magic formula, we will want to own 20 to 30 stocks at one time. In the magic formula's case, we want the average, that is average return for a portfolio of stocks chosen by the magic formula, since average results for the magic formula will hopefully even mean extraordinary investment returns. Owning many different stocks chosen by the magic formula should help ensure that we stay pretty close to the average. By now, I hope I have convinced 99% of you to just stick with the magic formula. But for those who still hope to develop a winning strategy for picking individual stocks, there is something that you would consider. Even professional research analysts and money managers have a tough time making accurate earnings prediction for individual companies. For these professionals, making an accurate prediction for 20 to 30 companies at the same time is even harder. It won't be easier for you. So here's my suggestion. If you still want to buy individual stocks, despite all the warnings, don't even try to make a lot of prediction. Limit your stock investment to small number of good companies that are available at bargain levels. For these few investors who are capable of estimating normal earnings several years into the future and placing values on businesses. Owning just a handful of bargain price stocks is the best way to go. As a rule of thumb, if you are truly doing good research and have a good understanding of the companies that you purchase, owning just 5 to 8 stocks in different industries can safely make up to at least 80% of your total portfolio. But what if you aren't an expert at valuing business and making predictions? Isn't there still some way you can intelligently play the stock picking game? While it may not be smart to hang out in a dynamite factories, so what? Some people would rather have a blast. Well, okay, there is a compromise strategy and it makes sense too. But we are still going to need the magic formula. There's just no way around that, not in the book anyway. Here it is. Rather than just blindly choosing stocks that catch your fancy or blindly accepting the output of the magic formula, how about combining both strategies? Start with magic formula and put together a list of top ranked stocks. Then choose a few of your favorites by whatever method you want. You must, however, choose solely from top 50 or 100 stocks as ranked by magic formula. Using this method, you will still place at least 10 to 30 stocks in your portfolio. The lower end of the range if you actually know something about evaluating businesses, and the higher end if you are choosing stocks based on birth signs. And if that should do it. And that should do it. Now the summary. Most people have no business investing in individual stocks on their own. Reread summary point number 1. Most people have no businesses investing in individual stocks of their own. On their own. But if you must, and you can actually predict normalized earnings several years down the road, use those estimates to figure out earnings yield and return on capital. Then use the principles of magic formula to look for good companies at a bargain price based on the estimates of normal earnings. Fourth, if you truly understand the business that you own, have a high degree of confidence in your normalized earnings estimate, owning 5 to 8 bargain price stocks in different industries can have a safe and effective investment strategy. Most people have no business investing in individual stocks on their own. Did I already mention that? How can owning just 5 to 8 stocks possibly a safe strategy? Think of it in this way. You are a successful local businessman who has just sold off his business for $1 million. You want to invest that money wisely so that you can safely earn a good return over time. You have the opportunity to reinvest the proceeds from the sale of your business by buying an ownership stake in some of the other businesses in town. You have some understanding of about 30 of those businesses. You have understanding of about 30 of those businesses, and your plan is to invest in companies that you understand well, that have a good future and that are available at a reasonable price. For those companies about which you feel most confident in your ability to make prediction, you project what normal earnings should be for several years. Down the road, you also look for companies that you believe will be able to continue in business for many years, and for companies that should have the ability to grow their earnings over time. Then you calculate earnings yield and return on capital based on your estimates for each of these companies. Of course, your goal is to find good businesses that can be purchased at bargain prices. On the basis of your analysis, you select your 5 favorites and invest $200,000 in each. Does that sound like a risky behavior? It would be if you had no idea how to read financial statement or evaluate individual businesses. But if you do have that ability, is buying a stake in your 5 favorite businesses enough? Would owning a stake in your 8 favorites be better? I think most people, especially those who view stocks as a long-term ownership stakes in actual businesses, would think that spreading $1 million among investment stakes in 5 to 8 bargain price businesses in a varying industry would qualify as a prudent behavior. At least that's the view I take with my investment portfolio. The more confidence I have in each one of my stock prices, the fewer companies I need to own in my portfolio to feel comfortable. Most investors view stocks and the construction of stock portfolios differently, however. Somehow, when ownership interests are divided into shares that bounce around with Mr. Market's moods, individuals and professionals start to think about and measure risks in strange ways. When short-term thinking and overly complicated statistics get involved, owning many companies that you already know very little about starts to sound safer than owning stakes in 5 to 8 companies that have good businesses, predictable futures and bargain prices. In short, for the few who have
the ability, knowledge, and time to predict normal earnings and evaluate individual stocks, owning less can actually be more profits, more safety, and more fun. Chapter 12, page number 110. There's something about the tooth fairy. For some reason, I have never been able to fully fess up to my kid about what really going on there. Perhaps I just want them to hold on to their childhood for as long as possible. Or maybe I just want to cherish the innocence of that stage of their lives. But whatever it is, I have been a rock while under the most intense of interrogations concerning my whereabouts after money had seriously appeared under the various pillows in question. I have I had a very few calls though. I thought the jig was up one day when one of my kids marched home from first grade with some new information. It's scary that kids of things they pick up hanging out in schoolyard. It seems a friend from absolutely no regard for all my years of stonewalling had spilled the beans. As I was doing all I could to choke back my disappointment, my miniature Sherlock Holmes declared, I know who the tooth fairy is. My mind raced for some way of out as he continued, it's Billy Gordon's mother. After explaining what a ridiculous logistical and financial nightmare it was of Billy Gordon's mother to roam the entire world night collecting teeth and shelling out money, I was able to quell that particular piece of misinformation, and luckily either because of lack of instinctive instincts or merely because they have learned to humor me over the years, that the closest any underage member of my house has come to cracking the case. But here's a secret, I have no problem divulging in my house whatever story my kids choose to believe is just fine with me. But in the stock market, there is only one story. There is only one version of a story I want them to know. It's harsh and it's unfair, but we have to grow up sometime, and it's about time you know it too. So here it is. When it comes to Wall Street, it ain't no tooth fairy. That's right. On Wall Street, money won't magically appear under your pillow. There's no one to tuck you in, no one to take care of you, and no one you can turn to for good advice. Once you have left the warmth and comfort of your home, the plain fact is you are on your own. To see why this is necessarily so, we are going to take our own little walk down Wall Street. But before we set out, let's make a few assumptions. First, you have some money that you would like to invest over the long term. Long term in the case means that you will not need this money for cover your normal expenses for at least the next 3 to 5 years and hopefully longer. Second, you would like to learn as much as possible from your investment, but you are willing to take reasonable risk. Finally, we have learned that there is generally true that the stock market offers the best possibility for high investment returns over time. This is where you would like to put your money. So where do we start? Well, one typical stop is our friendly neighborhood stockbroker. This is an investment professional whose job is to hold your hand and help you invest in your money. Stockbroker will help you choose between individual stock bonds, investment fund, and various other types of investment alternatives. If you have enough money, he or she will even speak with you on the phone, try to understand your needs and give you suggestion and advice. But here's the thing, if your stockbroker is like the vast majority, he or she has no idea how to help you. Most get paid a fee to sell a stock or a bond or some other investment product. But they don't get paid to make you money. Of course, while it's in their interest for you to be successful and many may be fine, well intentioned professionals or stockbrokers' main incentive is still to sell you something. They are trained to follow rules, understand certain financial terms, and explain various investment products. As for how to make you money in the stock market or elsewhere, anywhere else, forget it. You might as well just put your money in mutual fund. Now here's a perfect solution for a small investor. A mutual fund is an investment fund that is managed by a professional money manager. The manager usually selects a diverse group of stocks or bonds, generally for 30 to 200 different securities in the same fund. This is particularly efficient way for a small investor to spread his or her investment capital over a wide group of different investments. But here too there are some problems, and we have discussed before, it's tough to have special insight into many different companies and investment securities. Consequently, but here too there are some problems, and we have discussed before, it's tough to have special insight into many different companies, investment securities. Consequently, owning dozens and hundreds of positions does not often lead to above average returns. Then, of course, there is a small matter of fees. Mutual fund management companies need to charge a fee for their services. Basic math says that average returns minus fees equals below average returns. Not surprisingly, after subtracting fees and other expenses, the vast majority of mutual funds do not beat the market averages over time. And that's okay. We can just look for mutual funds that have above average managers. It should be relatively easy to tell whether a manager is above average or simply by looking at the fund's track record. The only problem with strategy is that on average there is no relationship between a fund's good past investment and record and its future returns. Even companies whose business is to rate mutual funds have a poor record of determining whether the fund will perform well in future. While there are many reasons for this, all of them difficult to resolve. Mutual fund companies get paid based on how much money is invested in each fund. A fund with a successful track record will usually attract more money over time. It is usually in the fund economic interest to accept this money. Once a fund grows large, it may be hard for managers to continue with the same strategy that led to successful returns. A few good ideas may now be spread over even thinner over a large pile of money. If investment is in smaller companies, generally partially possible for some of the success, this may no longer be possible in a large fund. Also, even talented managers have bad stretches of investment performance, just like magic formula. Conversely, bad managers can have good stretches. Telling which is which, even over a period of several years, is quite difficult. I could go on, but facts are facts. A good past investment record isn't much help when predicting future returns. And picking a good manager is like no easier than picking attractive individual stocks. Then again, if you could pick attractive stocks and probably wouldn't need the good manager. So instead you might consider investing in a hedge fund. These are exclusive private investment funds usually reserved for wealthy investors. Unfortunately, in most cases, unless you are already have at least 500,000 or so to invest, you probably won't even have this option. By law, most hedge funds can only accept investors who can afford to lose large amount of money. But even if you qualify for the WS honor, it is not clear that this is the smart way to go. Hedge funds are investment funds that have more flexibility than most usual funds. Managers can use the fund's capital and borrowed money to buy a large variety of securities. Generally, they are able to place bets on whether stocks, other securities, and entire market averages will move up or down. Most mutual funds are restricted to making money only when the securities they own go up. Most mutual funds are restricted to making money only when the securities they own go up. A hedge fund's ability to bet on or down many different securities, often with the aid of borrowed money, is seen as a big advantage over most standard mutual funds. It may be, but most hedge funds charge huge fees. At least 1% of assets under management plus 20% share of the profits. No doubt, attracted by the large profit fees, thousands of new hedge funds have been created over the past few years. Most will have no chance to justify their fees. These aren't many great managers, and your chances of finding one are quite slim. So that's why many people just choose to invest in an index fund. An index fund is a mutual fund that tries to equal the overall market return, just like less a very small fee. The fund just market cap per S&P 500 index of 500 large stocks, or the Russell 2000 index, and the index that consists of 2000 somewhat smaller stocks, and buy all the stocks in a particular index. Although the strategy won't help you beat the market, it will help you achieve returns that are at least close to the market averages. Since after taking into account fees and other uh, costs, most other investment choices leave you with much lower returns than index funds. Many people who have carefully studied the issue have concluded that settling for average returns is actually a pretty much good alternative. In fact, over the last 80 years, average returns for the stock market have means returns of over 10% per year, not bad at all. But what if you want to do better than average? The simple truth is there is no stop on our title little walk with that has answer for that one. That's because it's pretty much like I told you before. On Wall Street, there's no tooth fairy. Once you leave home, you can put your money under a professional pillow. But chances are, when you wake up, all you will be left with is a lousy performance. Of course, I know what you are going to ask. Isn't there somewhere you can go, something you can do, something as you can turn to? Well, it should come as no surprise that after 25 years it's invested in business. I have been asked these same questions many times. From time to time, I have been able to recommend a particularly good mutual fund manager or exceptionally hedge fund manager. In all cases, the fund is questioned that have subsequently grown to many times their original size, and the investment opportunity has largely vanished in a rather short period of time. I have also tried to help people by giving out an occasional stock tip. However, an occasional stock tip from me is not a very reliable or universally available long-term investment strategy. So I'm usually at the loss. If you want to do as little as possible and you don't mind doing average or index fund, could be a fine choice. But if you are capable of analyzing business and willing to do a fair amount of work, selectively picking in individual stocks can be a viable alternative. The only problem is that most people don't have the time or ability to analyze individual companies. As we discussed last chapter, if you don't know how to evaluate businesses and project normal earnings several years into the future, you have no business investing in individual stocks in the future. So here's the thing. As unbelievable as it may seem, if you truly want to beat the market, there is really only one good alternative left. After all we have been through, I probably don't have to spell it out to you, but let's say it rhymes with magic formula. That's right. Just like I promised earlier, for following the simple steps outlined at the end of this book, you can use the magic formula to beat the market. You can achieve extraordinary long-term investment returns, and you can achieve those returns with low risk. By following step by step, you will know exactly where to go and what to do. It won't even take much work, just minutes every few months. But that's not the hard part. The hard part is making sure that you understand why the magic formula makes sense. The hard part is continuing to believe that the magic formula still makes sense even when friends, experts, the news media, etc., Mr. Market indicate otherwise. Lastly, a hard part is just getting started. Though I have tried to make that task as easy as possible, so good luck. I truly believe that if you follow the lessons in the book, you will have a great deal of investment success. That's what makes this chapter or so important. After all, it's if my calculations are correct, you are going to be left with a pretty big problem. I'm very serious. I mean, what are you going to do with all that money? Quick summary: on Wall Street that end one on Wall Street that end no foot tooth fairy. Second, nothing much rhymes with magic formula. Third, your step by step instruction for beating the market using magic formula are coming right after this chapter.
Chapter 13, page number 121. What would you do if you had a lot of money? Of course, I mean, what would you do after taking care of your family and those close to you, after providing their retirement and the future of your loved ones, and after putting aside to buy a few luxuries along the way? What would you do? Actually, you may well have to answer that question someday. But don't worry, I am not going to bore you with a pile of statistics. I am going to tell you about all the money you could make using the magic formula. I am not going to discuss the whole idea of compound interest. That's the one where you invest a relatively small amount of money, earn a reasonable rate of return over time, continually reinvest all the earnings from those investments, and end up with a large amount of money. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm really too bad though. With the new rules for contributing larger amount of money to a tax advantage retirement accounts, it would have been a good thing to discuss. As it turns out, starting now and making the maximum allowable contribution to an IRA for just the next few years, you could turn a relatively small amount of money into much larger amount. Obviously, with the type of returns achieved by the magic formula in the past, this really could have mean a lot of money for you, but unfortunately we are not going to discuss it. It's truly a shame. By contributing just $28,000 in total over the past 6 years, the maximum of $4,000 per year in both 6 and 7, and then $5,000 per year starting 2008 for 4 years, the retirement account could have grown to cover $325,000 at the end of 20 years and over $1.3 million after 30 years. That's if you could achieve an annual return of investment of 15%. Of course, the past record of magic formula is somewhat better than 15% per year, but it would be irresponsible to project some higher annual return for into the future. That's because picking a number like 20% per year would turn the initial $28,000 into 7,52,000 after 20 years and about 4.3 million after 30 years. At an astronomical more than $4.3 million after 30 years, at an astronomical rate like 25% per year, a return that is still lower than past returns of one of our portfolio of smaller magic formula stocks. That is, stock would be $28,000 would have become $1.6 million in 20 years and $13.4 million in 30 years. But who's really counting? And with numbers like that, thank heaven I had the good sense not to mention it. But I will say this: if you are still in middle of even high school and you are approached by anyone, and I mean anyone, no matter how fancy the scooter or how persuasive the sales pitch, and they want you to put the single stick of gum for 25 cents, I have just 3 words of advice. Don't do it. I say that because at any moment you could forced to stand in the corner, the wad of gum stick to your nose. I say that because if you understood how a well invested quarter could possibly turn into more than $200 by the time you hit middle ages, you might not squander so much money on a single stick of gum. You might not spend money on a lot of things. Instead, you might start thinking about saving money whenever possible and spending time figuring out a good way to invest in. That's what I'm saying. Unfortunately, one thing I'm not saying is that using the magic formula for your investment going forward will guarantee results similar to the stellar performance of the past. I can't know that. But I can say this. I believe that using the magic formula and the principles behind the magic formula to guide your future investment will remain one of your best investment alternatives. I believe that if you are able to stick with the magic formula strategy through good periods and bad, you will handily beat the market averages over time. In short, I believe that even after everyone knows the magic formula, your results will continue to be not only satisfactory but a little luck extraordinary. So here's the deal. If you end up using the magic formula and if it helps you earn money that you feel grateful for a good fortune, you might consider this. In reality, all the time and effort put into stock market investing isn't a very productive use of time. Usually when you buy or sell shares in a publicly traded company, you are merely buying or selling to another shareholder. In other words, the underlying company is not involved. It receives nothing from the transaction. Many people argue that all the buying and selling activity is nevertheless quite useful. Though the buying and selling of shares, these people would argue an active marketplace for company share is established. Theoretically, if a company needs additional money, it can decide to sell additional shares into the marketplace. It can use the proceeds to pay bills, build factories, or expand into other ways. This is also true. Also, if Jason decides to expand this gum store from 10 stores to 300, he can sell some shares in this new and growing businesses directly to the public and raise money for the expansion. Since the buyer of Jason's gum shop shares know that there will be a marketplace for selling those shares after their initial purchase, Jason may have an easier time raising money for his business. The people who see great value in stock trading are right about this too. I'm not just I'm just not one of those people. Yes, it is nice to have a marketplace. In fact, it's very important. It's just that more than 95% of the trading back and forth each day is probably unnecessary. The market would be would still be fine without almost all of it. The market would certainly be fine without your contribution. In fact, the first day of class each semester, I tell all my MBA students that I am about to teach them skills that have limited value. It's not that they won't have the potential to make a lot of money from what they learn, is that they are probably higher and better uses for their time and intellect. As a consequence, in exchange of reaching them, I always ask my students to find some way to give back. So, for you too, I hope this book and step-by-step instructions that follow will help you reach all your investment goals. I strongly believe that it will. I also hope that those investment goals will include using some of the good fortune to make a difference in those areas that are important and have meaning to you. Good luck. There are of course many worthwhile things to do, and your money is addition to caring for the near and dear to you. Whether it involves supporting medical research, aiding the poor, promoting social justice, or supporting pretty much any worthy cause that you believe in, all would obviously be wonderful choices for your charitable dollars. But since this entire book is about investing your money in places where it can earn a high return on capital, I have one additional thought that you might consider. It is our education system that nurtures the entrepreneurs, scientists, engineers, technologists, high level workforce that help our economy grow and thrive. Over time, the performance of stock market reflects this progress. Yet it is very clear that we are wasting much of our future potential. In almost every major city in the United States, barely half of entering public school 9th graders end up graduating from high school. Think about that for a moment. Undoubtedly, there are many reasons for the devastating waste. The problem, whatever there might be, clearly cut across all grade levels. Many students enter the 9th grade already 4 or 5 grades level behind. So how should we solve this problem? Obviously, teaching young people should be a top priority. and spending money to teach children the skills necessary to become productive members of society should be a great investment. Talk about high return on capital. Just obvious is that there are negative costs to doing a bad job. Crime, drugs, welfare, to name of a few. So how are we going to solve this problem? Under capitalism, it would be pretty straightforward. If we were trying to fix a business like just broccoli, we would first try to change a few things. Maybe we would fire bad managers, hire better sales people, or do some advertising. But eventually, if results didn't improve, we would just close the stores. Under our system of capitalism, companies that can't earn an adequate return on capital eventually go out of business. That's very healthy. Instead of continually throwing money into investments that achieve poor returns, under capitalism, money is systematically directed into businesses that can make productive use of new capital. That's how our economy continues to grow and thrive over time. So how would you fix the public school system? First, you would try to make some changes. You might fire bad teachers, pay more for good teachers, remove bad principals, and at the end of the day, close bad schools. The money spent on the bad schools should be redirected to the schools, public or private, that could give a high return on capital spent. Unfortunately, in case of inner city public schools, the same problem has been going on for over 40 years, and fixes have been going on for just a long. The difference is this: in capitalism, if the fixes don't work, the business is closed. With public schools, that rarely happens. It's almost impossible to fire bad teachers, pay more to good teachers, or close bad schools. In short, there are no penalties for poor performance, incentives for good performance, or sequence for running a poor business. As a result, money spent on bad teachers or bad schools is almost never redirected to teachers, schools that can achieve higher returns on capital. So if we want to apply what we have learned about capitalism, any solution, whether they involve public school reform, charter schools, or voucher programs, need to address these issues. Otherwise, we'll be stuck with a just broccoli school system for a long time to come. If you have any further interest for websites, you might consider successforall.net, allianceforschoolchoice.com, achievement.org, democrats for education reform.org. Page number 131, step by step instructions. Here's the big picture. As you know, the magic formula has achieved excellent results in the past, so our goal is to create an easy to flow plan that will help reproduce those good results. But before we adopt any strategy, we need to consider a few things. First, since the returns reported in the book were based on holding a portfolio of roughly 30 stocks selected by magic formula, we should make sure that our plan includes holding at least 20 to 30 stocks at one time. Remember, the magic formula works on average, so holding any stock that are ranked highly by the magic formula should help keep us close to the average over time. Second, in our tests, each stock was held for a period of 1 year. Holding stocks for 1 year is still fine for tax-free accounts. For taxable accounts, we will want to adjust that slightly. For individual stocks in which we are showing a loss from our initial purchase price, we will want to sell a few days before our 1 year holding period is up. For those stocks with a gain, we will want to sell a day or two after the 1 year period is up. In that way, all our gains will receive the advantage of lower tax rate afforded to long-term capital gains. Maximum 15% tax rate under federal guidelines for stocks held more than 1 year, and all our losses will be received short-term tax treatment, a deduction against other sources of income that otherwise would have been taxable at rate up to 35%. Over time, this minor adjustment can add significantly to our after tax investment returns. Lastly, be aware that getting started will be the hardest part. We probably don't want to buy all 30 stocks at once. To reproduce the results from our test, we will have to work into our magic formula portfolio over the course of first year of investing. This means adding 5 to 7 stocks to our portfolio every few months until we reach 20 or 30 stocks in our portfolio. Thereafter, as stocks in our portfolio reaching the 1 year holding mark, we will replace only the 5 to 7 stocks that have been held for 1 year. If that's a little confusing, don't worry. Step by step instructions are about to follow. Now that we have that settled, we need to discuss a few simple ways to find our magic formula stocks. There are many choices for screening packages to help us sort through the universe of available stocks. Both web-based programs, software programs that utilize the web for updates. Some of these options are available for free, some other cost $99 per month or even more. Each has advantages and disadvantages based on ease of operation and the reliability, flexibility and breadth of data sources. Most will generate a reasonable set of magic formula stocks if certain conditions are applied, which as discussed below. One screening option was created specifically for this book, magicformulainvesting.com. The magicformulainvesting.com site is designed to enumerate the returns achieved in a study as closely as possible. The site is currently available for free. Step-by-step instruction for selecting stock using magicformulainvesting.com follow. Others options include but are not limited to the screening packages available in businessweek.com, i.com, moneycontrol.msn.com, powerinvestor.com and smartmoney.com. Though these sources are generally fine and are available either for free or reasonable price, they are not specifically designed to generate magic formula stocks. They will give you a rough approximation of magic formula results because of difference both in criteria the user can select and underlying data sources. Generally, screening instructions are available on each site. Page 134, option 1, magicformulainvesting.com. Go to the step 1, go to magicformulainvesting.com. Step 2, follow the instructions for choosing company size, example, capitalization. For step 3, follow the instruction to obtain a list of top ranked magic formula companies. Step 4, buy 5 to 7 top ranked companies. To start, invest only 20 to 33% of money you intend to invest during the first year. For smaller amount of capital, lower priced web brokers such as Folifan and .com, buyandhold.com and scottrade.com may be a good place to start. Step 5, repeat step 4 every 2 or 3 months until you have invested all of the money you have chosen to allocate to magic formula portfolio. After 9 or 10 months, this should result in portfolio of 20 to 30 stocks. Example, 7 to every stocks 3 months, 5 or 6 stocks every 2 months. Step 6, sell each stock after holding it for 1 year for taxable accounts. Sell winners after holding for a few days more than 1 year and sell losers after holding for a few days less than 1 year. Use the proceeds for sale and add additional investment money to proceeds sold companies with an equal number of new magic formula selection. Step 7, continue to process this for many years. Remember, you must be committed to continuing the process for minimum of 3 to 5 years regardless of results. Otherwise, you will most likely quit before the magic formula has chance to work. Step 8, feel free to write and thank me. Option 2, general screening instructions. If you are screening options other than magicformulainvesting.com, you should take the following steps for best approximate results of magic formula. Use return on assets as screening criterion. Set the minimum return on asset as 25%. This will take place of return on capital from magic formula study. From the resulting group of high return on asset stocks, screen for those stocks which are lowest price to earnings ratio. Third, eliminate all utilities and financial stocks, i.e., mutual funds, banks, and insurance companies from the list. Fourth, eliminate all foreign companies from the list. In most cases, this will have suffix ADR for American Depository Receipt after the name of the stock. If a stock has a very low PE ratio, say 5 or less, that may indicate that the previous year or the data being used are unusual in some way. You may want to eliminate this stock from your list. You may also want to eliminate any company that has announced earnings in the last week. This should help minimize the incidence of incorrect, untimely data. After obtaining your list, follow step 4 and 8 from the Magic Formula Investing.com instructional page. Appendix. Important note: the appendix is not a required reading. To utilize the Magic Formula strategy successfully, you must understand only two basic concepts. First, buying good companies at bargain prices makes sense. On average, this is what the Magic Formula does. Second, it can take Mr. Market several years to recognize a bargain. Therefore, the Magic Formula strategy requires patience. The information that follows in the section is merely additional commentary on these 2 points. The appendix includes background information about the Magic Formula for those with a higher level of understanding of financial statements. It also compares the logic and results of the Magic Formula strategy with other studies and methods that have demonstrated an ability to beat the market. The Magic Formula, page number 138. The Magic Formula ranks companies based on 2 factors: return on capital and earnings yield. These factors can be measured in several different ways. The measure chosen to study in the book are described in more details as follows. Return on capital. EBIT divided by net working capital plus net fixed assets. Return on capital was measured by calculating the ratio of pre-tax operating earnings to tangible capital employed, that is net working capital plus net fixed assets. This ratio was used rather than the more commonly used ratios of return on equity or return on assets for several reasons. EBIT was used in place of reported earnings because companies operate with a different level of debt and differing tax rates. Using operating earnings before interest and taxes, or EBIT, allowed us to view and compare the operating earnings of different companies without the distortions arising from the differences in tax rates and debt levels. For each company, it was then possible to compare actual earnings from operations to the cost of assets used to produce those earnings, tangible capital employed. Net working capital plus net fixed assets or tangible capital employed was used in place of total assets. used in a ROA calculation, or equity used in ROE calculation. The idea here was to figure out how much capital is actually needed to conduct the company's business. Net working capital was used because the company has to fund its receivables and inventory. Excess cash not needed to conduct the business was excluded from the calculation, but does not have to lay out money for its payable, as these are effectively an interest-free loan. Short-term interest-bearing debt was excluded from current liabilities for this calculation. In addition to working capital requirement, a company must also fund the purchase of assets, fixed assets necessary to conduct its business, such as real estate, plant and equipment. The depreciated net cost of the fixed asset was then added to the net working capital requirement already calculated to arrive to at an estimate for tangible capital employed. Note: intangible assets, specifically goodwill, were excluded from tangible capital employed calculations. Goodwill usually arises as a result of an acquisition of another company. The cost of an acquisition is excess of the tangible assets acquired is usually assigned to a goodwill account. In order to conduct its future business, the acquiring company usually only has to replace tangible assets such as plant and equipment. Goodwill is a historical cost that does not have to be constantly replaced. Therefore, in most cases, return on tangible capital alone, excluding goodwill, will be more accurate reflection of a business return on capital going forward. The return on equity and return of asset calculation used by many investment analysts are therefore often distorted by ignoring the difference between reported equity and assets and tangible equity and assets, in addition to distortion due to differing tax and debt levels. Point number 2, page number 141. Earnings yield. EBIT divided by enterprise value. Earnings yield was measured by calculating the ratio of pre-tax earnings EBIT to enterprise value, market value of the equity, plus net interest bearing debt. The ratio was used rather than the more commonly used PE ratio or EP ratio for several reasons. The basic idea behind the concept of earning yield is simply to figure out how much a business earns relative to the purchase price of the businesses. Enterprise value was used instead of merely the price of the equity. Enterprise value was used instead of merely the price of the equity. Total market capitalization, share value multiplied by shares outstanding, because enterprise value takes into account both the price paid for an equity stake in business as well as the debt financing used by the company to help generate operating earnings. By using EBIT, which looks at actual operating earnings before interest, expense and taxes, and comparing it to enterprise value, we can calculate the pre-tax earnings yield on the full purchase price of a business, i.e. pre-tax operating earnings relatively to the price of equity plus debt assumed. This allows us to put companies with different levels of debt and different tax rates on equal footing when comprising earnings yield. For example, in the case of an office building purchased for $1 million with an $800,000 mortgage and $200,000 in equity, the price of the equity is $200,000, but the enterprise value is $1 million. If the building generates EBIT of $100,000, then EBIT divided by EV or pre-tax earnings yield would be 10%. That is 100,000 divided by $100,000. However, the use of debt can be greatly skewed apparatus returns from the purchase of these same assets. When only the price of equity is considered, assuming an interest rate of 6% on an $800,000 mortgage and a 40% corporate tax, the pre-tax earnings yield equity purchase price of $200,000 would appear to be 26%. As debt levels change, the pre-tax earnings yield on equity would keep changing. Yet, the $1 million cost of the building and the 100,000 EBIT generated by the building would remain unchanged. In other words, PE and EPS are generally influenced by the change of debt levels and tax rates, while EBIT divided by EV is not. Consider two companies, company A and company B. They are actually the same company, the same sales, the same operating earnings, the same everything, except the company A has no debt, company B has $50 in the debt at a 10% interest rate. At information, all information is per share. Sales is 10, EBIT is 10, interest experience 0, 5. Pre-tax income 10, pre-tax income 5, tax 40%, 4, 2. The price of the company A is $60 per share, then the price of the company B is $10 per share. What is cheaper? Let's see. PE of a company A is 10. That is $60 divided by 6. PE of company B is 33.33, $10 divided by 3. Company A is 10%, 6 by 10, while the earnings of company B is 30%. So which is cheaper? The answer is obviously company B. B has PE of only 3.3 and an earning yield of 30%. That looks much cheaper than the company A. So which is cheaper? The answer is obviously company B has PE of only 3.33 and an earning yield of 30%. That looks much cheaper than company A. PE of 10 and earnings yield of only 10%. So company B is clearly cheaper, right? Not so fast. Let's look at EBIT or EBIT divided by earnings value for both companies. They are the same. To a buyer of a whole company, would it matter whether you paid $10 per share for a company and owed another $50 per share, or you paid $60 and owed nothing? It is the same thing. You would be buying $10 worth of EBIT for $60 either way. Random walk spoiled. Page number 145. For many years, academics had debated whether it is possible to find bargain price stocks other than by chance. The notion, sometimes loosely referred to as random walk or efficient market theory, suggests that for the most part, the stock market is very efficient at taking in all publicly available information and setting stock prices. That is through the interactions of knowledgeable buyers and sellers. The market does a pretty good job of pricing stocks at fair value. The theory, along with the failure of most professional managers to beat the market averages over the long term, has understandably led to movement towards indexing, a cost-effective strategy designed to merely manage the market's returns. Of course, over the years, many studies have attempted to identify strategies that can beat the market, but these studies have often criticized on numerous grounds. The study beats the market. The study beats the market on because the data used to select stocks weren't really available to investors at the price at the time the selection took place. The study was based because the database used in the study has been cleaned up and excluding companies that later went bankrupt, making study results look better than the really were. The study included very small companies that could have been purchased at the price listed in the database and uncovered companies too small for professionals to buy. The study did not outperform the market by a significant amount after factoring in transaction cost. The study picked stocks that were in some phase riskier than the market, and that's why performance was better. The stock selection strategy was based on backtesting many different stock selection strategies until one was found that worked. The stock selection strategies used to beat the market included knowledge gained from previous market beating studies that was not available at the time of stock purchases were made in the study. Luckily, Magic Formula doesn't appear to have any of these problems. A newly released data from Standard and Poor composite called Point in Time was used. The database contains the exact information that was available to compensate customers on each date tested during the study period. The database goes back 17 years. The time period selected for the Magic Formula study, but using only the special database, it was possible to ensure that no look ahead or survivorship bias took good. Further, the Magic Formula worked for both small and large capitalization stocks, provided returns far superior to market averages, and achieved those returns while taking on much lower risk than the overall market, no matter how the risk was measured. Consequently, small size, high transaction cost, and added risk do not appear to be reasonable sound for questioning the validity of Magic Formula results. As the data mining and using academic research not available at the time of stock selection, this did not take place either. In fact, the two factors used for the Magic Formula study were actually the first two factors tested. Simply high earnings yield combined with a high return on capital were the two factors we judged to be the most important when analyzing a company before Magic Formula study was conducted. In sum, despite its obvious simplicity and usual objection, the Magic Formula appears to work. It works well when compared to much more sophisticated strategies used in some of the best market beating research completed to date. Yet, in one sense, the success of the Magic Formula strategy should not be surprised. Simple methods for beating the market have been well known for quite some time. Many studies over when compared to much more sophisticated strategies using some of the best market beating research compared to date. Yet in one sense, the success of Magic Formula strategy should not be a surprise. Simple words for beating the market have been well known for quite some time. Many studies over the years have confirmed the value oriented strategies that beat the market over long period horizons. Several different measures of value have been shown to work. These strategies include, but are not limited to, selecting stocks based upon low ratios of price to book value, price to earnings, price to cash flows, price to sales, and or price to dividends. Similarly to the results found in the Magic Formula study, these simple value strategies do not always work. However, measured over longer periods, they do. Though these strategies have been well documented over many years, most individual professional investors do not have the patience to use them. Apparently, the long period of underperformance makes them difficult and for some professionals impractical to implement. Another problem with this simple method is that they work well. They work far better on some smaller and medium capitalization stocks than with large stocks. This should not be surprising either. Companies that are too small for professionals to buy, that are not large enough to generate sufficient commission revenue to justify analyst coverage, are more likely to be ignored and misunderstood. As a result, they are more likely to present opportunities to find bargain price stocks. This was the case in the Magic Formula study. The formula achieved the greatest performance with the smallest capitalization stocks studied. However, the good performance cannot be reasonably attributed to a small cap effect because small capitalization stocks did not appreciably outperform large caps during the study period. Dividing our universe of stocks into deciles by market capitalization during the 70th year study period, the smallest 10% of stocks provided returns of 12.1%, with the largest 10% of stocks returned 11.9%. The next deciles were summarily close to 12.2% of the next smallest and 11.9% of the next largest. But the whole issue of whether small capitalization stocks outperform large capitalization stocks is not particularly relevant. It seems clear that there is a greater opportunity to find bargains and overpriced stocks for that matter. It seems clear that there is opportunity to find bargains and overpriced stocks for that matter. In the small caps arena, both because these are more stocks to choose from and because smaller stocks are more likely to be lightly analyzed and as a result more likely to be mispriced. In a sense, it is just easier for simple methods like price book screens and the magic formula to find bargain stocks among these smaller capitalization stocks. However, where the magic formula parts way with previous market beating studies, whether simple or sophisticated, is that for larger stocks market cap over 1 billion, the results for magic formula remain incredibly robust. Other methods do not fare nearly as well. For example, during our study period, the most widely used measure to identify value and growth stocks, price to book value, did not discriminate particularly strong between winners and losers for these large stocks. The best ranked decile of low price and book stocks, cheapest 10%, beat the worst ranked decile of high price book stocks for most expensive 10% by only 2% per year. In comparison, Magic Formula strategy did much better. The best ranked decile of Magic Formula stocks, cheapest 10%, beat the worst ranked decile, most expensive 10%, by over 14% per year on average during the 17-year period. The best decile returned 18.88%, the worst returned 4.66%, while the market average for the universe of over $1 billion stocks was 11.7%. In truth, this is not surprising. While having a low price relative to the historical cost of assets may be an indication that a stock is cheap, high earnings relative to price and to the historical cost of assets are much more direct measure of cheapness and should work better. Of course, these two factors are the ones used in the magic formula study. One of the most significant recent studies conducted by Joseph Petrosky at the University of Chicago took price book analysis one step further. Petrosky observed that while low price book stocks beat the market on average, less than half of the stocks selected during the strategy actually outperformed the markets. By using simple and readily available accounting metrics, Petrosky wondered whether he could improve the result of generic price book strategy. Petrosky rated the top quintile of low price book stocks, the cheapest 20%, using 9 different measurements of financial health. These included measures of profitable operating efficiency and balance sheet strength. The results over the 21-year study was spectacular, with one exception. For larger stocks, it didn't really work. For the largest one-third of the stocks by market capitalization. The highest ranked stocks on Petrosky's 9-point scale did not significantly outperform the average low price book stock. This is not surprising either. As already mentioned, it's just easier to find mispriced stocks among smaller and mid capitalization issues. But the relative inability for market betting methods to work with large cap stocks is not unique. Even every sophisticated market betting strategies, while showing excellent result in general, do not fare nearly as well as the relative simple magic formula in the large universe. For example, some of the best work done to date on sophisticated factors models are completed by Robert Hugen and Nardine Baker. Professor Hugen actually started an advisory business based on excellent results achieved in the groundbreaking paper. Essentially, instead of the two factors used in the magic formula strategy, Huygens developed a sophisticated model using 71 factors that supposedly help predict how stocks will do in future. These 71 factors evaluate stocks based on risk, liquidity, financial structure, profitability, price history, and analyst estimates. Based on complicated weighing of all these different factors, Huygens model predicts future earnings of each stock, historical expected returns for the stock in the 3000 plus stock universe. Evaluated Huygens model have been posted on the website, covering the period from February 94 till November 2004. We decided to test Huygens model to see whether it worked for large capitalization stock, that with a market cap more than $1 billion in 2004 dollars. It did. The result was very spectacular. Over 10 plus year period, the market average for the large cap universe tested returned 9.38%, but buying the highest ranked stocks based on Huygens 71 factor model returned 22.98%. The lowest ranked stocks, worst ranked decile, actually lost 6.91%. This amount to a spread of almost 30% between best and worst. This assumed that stocks were held for only 1 month and then re-ranked at the end of each month. Of course, though these results were great, the magic formula did better. Over the same 10 years period, the highest ranked stocks, best ranked decile, based on the magic formula two-factor model, returned 24.25%. The worst ranked stocks, worst decile, lost 7.91%. This amounts to spread from best to worst of over 32%. Though the results from the magic formula strategy were somewhat better and easier to achieve than the results from 71 factor model used by Huygens, the performance of both models was excellent and quite comparable. But here's the thing: most people don't and shouldn't invest by buying stocks and holding them for only 1 month. Besides the huge amount of time, transaction costs, and tax expenses involved, this is essentially a trading strategy, not really a practical long-term strategy. So what happens if we change our test and hold each portfolio 1 year? Actually, something very interesting. Huygens 71 model still does well. The best ranked decile works at 12.55%, and the worst ranked decile works 6.92%. The spread from high to low is down to 5.36%. If we hadn't just seen 1 month return, this will look pretty good. But what happens when the magic formula? The best ranked decile is 18.43 and worst ranked decile returns 1.49%. A spread of almost 17% between best and worst. That's pretty good no matter how you look at it. Here's something else that is interesting. The worst return during those 10 plus years for following Huygens strategy for 36 months straight with annual turnover was 43.1%. The worst 36 months period for magic formula was 14.3%. Not all positive 14.3%. Not only the magic formula used 69 fewer factors and a lot less math. So here's the point: the magic formula appears to perform very well. I think and hope it will continue to perform well in the future. I also hope that just a Mark Twain aptly referred to golf as a good walk spoil. Perhaps someday random walk will finally be considered spoiled as well. The end of the book, The Little Book That Beats the Market by Paul Greenblatt, forward by Andrew Tobias, published by John Willie and Sons Inclusive. Thank you. Jai Gurudev.